Hi guys. Tonight we step barefoot onto a shoreline, so cold it almost crackles, and you feel that first breath of Viking air slide into your lungs like a thin blade of winter. You stand where early settlers once arrived, half frozen, half hopeful, staring at a land that doesn't care whether you survive or turn into a human icicle. And honestly, if you showed up here in your usual indoor clothes, you probably won't survive this. The wind bites, the frost stings, and every instinct in your body whispers that you need shelter before the night eats you alive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fun to see this sleepy little community scattered across the world. Now, dim the lights, because you are here, wrapped in darkness and the smell of brine, tramping along a jagged coastline where the Vikings first pressed their boots into unfamiliar ground. The waves slap against frost-stiffened rocks, and you follow their rhythm like a drum that keeps you walking. This settlement to be is raw and empty. No chimneys, no welcoming glow, no steaming broth waiting by some imaginary fire. Just a few scraggly birch trees, wind that hits your cheeks like thrown sand, and the distant creaking groan of pack ice moving somewhere offshore. You don't know yet where these people will build. They don't either. All they know is that they need a spot where the land won't bury them in snowdrifts or drown them during the spring melt. The Vikings were famously skilled sailors, a mainstream historical fact. You've heard 100 times, but out here, none of that matters unless they can plant themselves somewhere that won't kill them by January. You're walking with them as they scan the horizon, murmuring in low voices, looking for any natural formation that might break the wind. A ridge, a cluster of shrubs, even the curved slope of a hill. Your boots, or whatever your imagination gives you, sink into a mash of wet sand and early frost. Every crunch feels like a warning. You notice how they kneel occasionally, running their fingers through soil, feeling its dampness, lifting it to their noses as if smelling it might reveal hidden secrets. And in a way, it does. Damp soil means colder floors. Rocky ground means unstable posts. A shallow layer of earth risks frost heave, yes. The unglamorous reality of a landscape that literally pushes buildings upward like nature's prank. Historians still argue whether early settlers fully understood frost heave or simply learned by watching their first houses twist and tilt like confused goats. Either way, you can picture the irritation on their faces. You'd be annoyed too. The wind whistles across your ears, sneaking under your collar, and for a moment you feel exactly what they feel, the urgent need for warmth. Shelter isn't optional here, it's survival. Even now, your instinct might be to hunch your shoulders, tuck your chin into your chest, and brace yourself against the cold. That's what they do too. They pull their cloaks tighter, thick, scratchy wool that's been lanolin soaked so it repels water and keep moving inland. A quirky tidbit slips quietly into the moment. Some early Norse travelers believed that certain coastal winds carried the moods of ancient spirits, and those spirits preferred when newcomers showed humility. So, if you catch yourself shivering and whispering a tiny apology to the cold, well, congratulations, you're accidentally following old etiquette. The settlers finally pause at a low rise blanketed with thin grass and hardy shrubs. You brush your fingertips over them, and the leaves snap from brittleness. Above you, the sky has that eerie grey-blue glow of Scandinavian twilight, a light that lasts longer than it should yet feels too soft to warm anything. You listen because that's all you can do as the Vikings debate in soft growls, pointing at the hillside, the nearby stream, the sheltering shape of a natural depression. They're looking for a balance, enough drainage to avoid mud, enough open space to build long, wide structures, enough protection from the wind so their first winter doesn't end in disaster. You inhale, and the air is sharp with pine sap, brine, and the faint musk of wet wool. You exhale, and it fogs instantly. You imagine what it must feel like to know you have only months, maybe less, to prepare for one of the harshest winters on the planet. You can almost feel their pulse quicken. You know that feeling too. That moment when you realize you must build something so solid, so warm, so thoughtfully arranged that it stands between you and the kind of cold that steals breath in seconds. You step forward with them as they test the ground with spear butts and the heels of their boots. One man scoops up a handful of soil and crumbles it between his fingers. Another kneels and presses his ear to the earth, a little eccentric, possibly superstition, but maybe he's listening to underground water. You can't tell, and perhaps neither could he. But he's doing something that makes the others nod with mild approval, so you pretend it's perfectly reasonable too. The longer you stand here, the more you sense the outline of the future taking shape. The Vikings are about to create a home, a warm, smoke-scented, firelit haven that will protect them from months of darkness and cold, so deep it gnaws through wood, and you will walk through every step of that creation, not as a distant observer but as someone whose hands feel the timber, whose breath mingles with the frost, whose heartbeat echoes the thud of their axes. For now, though, you're simply choosing the land. The wind shifts, brushing your cheek like cold fingers, and you pull your cloak tighter in sympathy with the Vikings. You glance at the trees' short, twisted trunks shaped by relentless weather and wonder how they will turn these stunted forms into homes strong enough to laugh in winter's face. But they will. You know they will. The Vikings have done this before, and they'll do it again. And as the sky deepens into a cold violet and the first stars blink awake, the settlers look at one another, silently agreeing, here, this is the spot. This is where warmth will rise, where families will sleep, where firelight will glow against timber and turf. This is where the long, winding story of survival begins. You wake the next morning with frost clinging to your eyelashes, the world around you pale and quiet except for the distant thunk of an axe biting into wood. The Vikings have wasted no time, and neither do you. Your breath clouds the air as you walk toward the tree line, where they are already testing the trunks with practiced palms, deciding which timber can stand between them, and months of bitter cold. The sun hangs low, giving almost no warmth, but its muted glow lets you trace the silhouette of each tree, as if you are reading a slow, ancient script carved into the forest. You run your hand along a birch trunk. The bark feels papery and fragile, like it could peel away at your touch. Not ideal for holding heat. The Vikings know that too. They mutter quietly among themselves, gauging which species can meet the needs of a home that must be both flexible and strong. A mainstream historical fact finds its place here. Norse settlers often favored pine and spruce for building, not because they were romantic about forests, but because these woods grew straight, were easier to split, and handled moisture better than most. Straight-grained wood means fewer cracks, fewer drafts, fewer winter nights spent wondering why your toes feel like frozen turnips. You trail after a small group as they push deeper into the forest. The trees creak gently in the wind, each sound like a soft warning. You pay attention the way they do, watching how a trunk leans, listening to how branches rustle. Is the tree dry inside or waterlogged? Does the wind shape it into a natural curve that might weaken the frame of a house? Historians still argue whether Vikings selected timber with engineering precision or if they relied mostly on intuition built from generations of practice. You suspect it was both, because you watch these settlers tilt their heads, squint, whisper to one another, and occasionally thump a trunk as if asking it politely whether it is up for the job. A quirky tidbit emerges when one young builder taps a tree with the butt of his axe and declares, with complete seriousness, that it sounds grumpy and should be left alone. The others roll their eyes but leave it anyway. Maybe he is joking. Maybe he is superstitious. Maybe, in the strange hush of a Scandinavian forest, even you start to wonder whether some trees prefer to keep standing. You notice the rhythm of work forming. Someone marks trunks with small cuts at the base. Someone else gathers fallen branches for kindling. You pick up a handful of pine needles from the forest floor, crush them between your fingers, and breathe in their sharp, resinous scent. It prickles your nose pleasantly, a small comfort in the cold. The Vikings pause occasionally to smell the air too. Not because it is poetic, but because sap-heavy wood burns hotter, lasts longer, and bends more willingly without snapping. The first tree falls with a groaning crack that echoes through the forest. You feel it in your chest, a deep vibration that rolls under your feet. Snow flutters down from branches overhead, shaken loose by the impact. As the trunk lies still, the Vikings waste no time stripping branches, smoothing knots, and measuring lengths. Their tools bite into the wood with satisfying rasping strokes, a sound that somehow warms the edges of your imagination. You crouch nearby, examining the tools they use. Simple, yes, but incredibly effective. The broad axe leaves clean cuts. The adze shapes the surface with careful scoops. Every strike sends chips flying, each warm, curling shaving releasing a burst of earthy scent that feels almost cozy despite the frigid air. You catch one in your glove. It curls like a ribbon, steaming softly in the cold. You follow as they drag logs toward the settlement site. The work is slow, heavy, and rhythmic. You can hear their boots crunching through frost, the grunt of effort, the occasional shared joke that sounds like the kind of humor people cling to when the cold might chew on their ears. You walk alongside them, imagining how your own shoulders would ache if you were the one hauling timber uphill. The landscape seems to widen as you approach the clearing chosen yesterday. It looks more promising now, as if the earth itself waits patiently to be anchored by these new wooden bones. You stand with them at the edge of the clearing, looking over the logs now neatly piled like sleeping giants. The frost patterns on the bark shimmer faintly in the pale light, like tiny runes scribbled by the night. You reach out and brush them with your fingertips. The cold stings, but there is something grounding about touching the raw materials that will soon cradle firelight, laughter, and quiet winter breathing. The Vikings talk about how many trunks they need, how thick they should be, whether to split some or keep them whole. They gesture to the ground, drawing rough outlines with the tips of their boots. You notice that the trees they chose are not massive. In many parts of Scandinavia, towering timber was rare, and settlers had to work with shorter, narrower logs. This meant more joints, more planning, more clever angles. A challenge, but also an opportunity. Smaller trees dry faster. They are easier to handle, and they can still hold warmth if arranged with precision. As the Vikings work, you sense the importance of every decision. The angle of a cut determines how tightly one log will rest against another. The type of wood affects how heat will linger inside the house when the world outside becomes a freezing void. The direction of the grain changes how sound travels through the walls. You press your palm against a prepared log, feeling its faint warmth from fresh cutting, and imagine the countless winter nights ahead when families will sit beside their hearth, protected by these quiet, uncomplaining beams. The wind shifts again, colder this time, nipping at your ears. One builder notices your slight shiver and smirks, as if to say you will get used to it. Maybe you will. The Vikings certainly have. They keep chopping, trimming, hauling, shaping. Hours pass in a slow, steady rhythm, and the clearing fills with stacks of timber ready to become walls, roofs, supports, and frames. You glance around and realize how the forest has already begun to transform into a future home. Every tree chosen is a promise. Every cut is a step toward warmth. Every decision, even the ones based on quirky superstition, nudges the settlement closer to safety. The landscape feels alive with effort, and you find yourself warming from the inside despite the frosty air. You lift your gaze to the horizon as the light begins to dim. You can almost see the shape of the longhouse already rising in your mind, its walls sturdy, its roof snug, its hearth glowing. But for now, you stand among the logs, wrapped in the scent of fresh split pine and the comforting certainty that the Vikings know exactly how to choose the timber that will get them through the coldest nights yet to come. You return to the clearing later in the day, the frost crunching beneath your feet as you watch the Vikings begin shaping the most unlikely building material of all, the earth itself. At first glance, Sod looks like nothing more than ragged clumps of grass and dirt, the kind of thing you would kick aside on a morning walk. But here, in this brutal climate, it becomes a quiet hero. You kneel down and run your fingers along a thick slab that has just been cut from the hillside. It is heavy, damp, and surprisingly dense, almost like a natural brick wrapped in tangled roots. The Vikings lift each slab carefully, stacking them near the timber that will form the skeleton of their longhouse. You notice how the roots interlock, creating a kind of living mesh. You would not expect grass to be a great insulator, but the truth is that the air trapped inside soil and roots makes these turf blocks astonishingly good at holding warmth. One widespread fact that many students of Norse culture already know is that turf houses appear again and again in cold regions, from Iceland to Greenland, because nothing else keeps heat in so efficiently with so few resources. You watch as they cut more sod, using long-handled spades. The blades slide under the earth with a soft rasping sound, lifting each section like a thick carpet. When the slabs flip over, the underside reveals layers of soil forming natural insulation. The smell rises immediately. Damp earth, rotting leaves, wet minerals. It is oddly comforting, like the scent of a greenhouse after rain. You lift a chunk yourself and are surprised at its weight. No wonder the Vikings build with it. Heavy materials stay put when winter storms try to tear everything apart. One widespread fact that many students of Norse culture already know is that turf houses appear again and again in cold regions, from Iceland to Greenland, because nothing else keeps heat in so efficiently with so few resources. In Old Norse settlements, elders often advised on building choices, even if their reasoning sounded mysterious to the younger generation. A curious snippet preserved in some sagas describes certain families cutting turf only from northern slopes because they believed roots growing against the wind made the blocks stronger. Whether or not that superstition held any scientific truth, it created a tradition that shaped the design of many early winter homes. You follow the group as they haul sod closer to the site. The slabs thud onto the ground one after another, forming neat piles. They talk quietly, discussing how thick to make the walls. Some prefer one layer, others insist on two or even three. You catch fragments of debate, sharp but calm. Their breath fogs between sentences, drifting upward like pale smoke. A lingering disagreement among modern researchers focuses on exactly how thick Viking sod walls typically were in different regions, since surviving ruins vary widely. Some ruins show walls nearly a meter thick, while others are half that. You imagine these settlers would laugh if they heard scholars arguing centuries later about the thickness of dirt. The Vikings begin laying out the first rough outline of the longhouse walls. Timber posts will form the beams, but the sod will fill the spaces between, forming a heavy, insulating coat. You step closer as they place a slab against a cut log. The texture surprises you. It feels soft on the outside, yet firm underneath, as if it were a cushion made for the cold. One man pats a slab affectionately, muttering something about it being warmer than his cousin. You are not sure whether that is an insult or a compliment, but either way, the others laugh and keep working. You help in small ways, brushing loose soil from the tops of slabs, clearing rocks from the ground so the base will sit even. As you work, you realize that this system is almost elegant in its simplicity. The earth gives what the settlers need, layer after layer of ready-made insulation. Instead of expensive materials, they use what lies beneath their boots. Instead of delicate construction, they embrace mass and density. A sod wall does not pretend to be beautiful. Heavy materials stay put when winter storms try to tear everything apart. The more time you spend handling the turf, the more you appreciate its resilience. When you press your thumb into a slab, the soil yields slightly, but does not crumble. Roots grip strongly. Moisture clings inside, but does not leak. You imagine freezing winds slamming into the house months from now, only to slide off these thick walls like dull knives hitting a shield. The turf does not care about wind. It does not care about snow. it simply endures. As you pause to stretch your back, you look around the clearing. The logs pile higher. Sod stacks rise like earthen towers waiting for placement. The shapes of future walls are becoming clearer. You can already sense the interior forming. A long, warm corridor shielded from the biting cold. A sanctuary where firelight will dance across wood and soil. One Viking walks over with a grin, tossing you a piece of turf. It lands in your hands with a wet smack. He tells you, in a half-joking tone, that turf blocks should feel like dense cake. Not too crumbly, not too soggy. Just enough firmness to stack without sagging. You laugh because the comparison makes sense. And as absurd as it sounds, it reminds you that building a home here is as much art as it is labor. You stand beside the growing line of marked posts, imagining how these turf slabs will soon be wedged between beams. The combination of wood and earth will create a thick barrier against the cruelty of winter. You picture snow piling high against the walls, frost crawling across the roof, and inside, people sleeping peacefully, wrapped in furs, unaware that storms rage just beyond the thick, earthen shell. You take one last deep breath before dusk settles fully. The smell of soil clings to your gloves. The cold brushes against your neck. You sense that you are standing at the threshold of a home that is not yet built, but already alive with potential. This turf, humble as it looks, will become the quiet insulation that saves lives through endless nights. You wake the next morning to a faint orange glow spreading across the horizon, a light so gentle it feels more like a whisper than a sunrise. The clearing has changed again overnight. The piles of timber look more purposeful now, lined up like ribs waiting to become part of a living body. The sod lies in tidy stacks, still damp from yesterday, the scent of earth lingering in the cold air. And in the center of all this, the Vikings begin tracing the first curves and corners of what will soon become their longhouse. You step closer, feeling the crunch of frozen soil beneath your feet, and as you look at the faint outline on the ground, you realize the scale of what they are building. Longhouses get their name for a reason. Even in their simplest form, they stretch like wooden ships placed upside down on land. You run your fingers across the rough lines marked into the dirt. The shape is long and narrow, gently tapering toward the ends, a design that helps shed snow and channel wind. A detail most people familiar with Norse life already know is that these structures often served multiple purposes all at once. Families slept here, animals sheltered here, tools were kept safe here, and daily life revolved around the warmth these walls trapped. The longhouse was not just a building, it was a world. You straighten up as the Vikings begin placing the first posts. The air fills with the sound of heavy logs thudding into position. Each post is angled slightly inward, forming the beginnings of a curved roofline. You can imagine how, months from now, snow will slide harmlessly down those angled sides instead of accumulating on top. You touch one of the posts, feeling its chilled bark under your glove. It stands firm, rooted in a hole carefully dug to just the right depth. No deeper than necessary, no shallower than safe. Every bit of effort here is measured, shaped by experience and weather. A group gathers at the center of the outline, discussing spacing and height. Their voices are low but steady. The wind carries fragments of their conversation to you. They talk about joints, angles, and weight distribution. One builder draws in the frost with a stick, sketching a rough frame. Another nods, kicks the ground thoughtfully, and gestures toward the timber piles. And you realize something that always unsettles newcomers to Viking history. There were countless variations of longhouse designs, each shaped by local needs. Some builders favored a taller interior for better airflow. Others preferred a short, stout structure that hugged the heat more closely. Archaeologists continue to puzzle over why certain regions built longer houses while others kept them compact. There is no single blueprint. There is only adaptation. You wander toward the far end of the clearing as the Vikings begin hoisting the first crossbeams. The logs creak as they rise, ropes straining under the load, while hands grip the wood with instinctive precision. The cold makes everything harder. Every rope is stiff. Every knot takes twice as long. You can feel the tension in their muscles, hear it in their breath. And yet they move with practiced confidence, the kind that comes from generations who spent their lives carving shelter out of unforgiving landscapes. As you watch, one man pauses to adjust a wooden peg, tapping it with the handle of his axe until it sinks snugly into place. He does not rush, and no one tells him to hurry. This slow, careful rhythm is essential. A beam fitted poorly could twist the entire structure. A joint misaligned could let in drafts that steal heat during the darkest nights. You lay your hand on the beam and sense the quiet hum of potential warmth. Even unfinished, the longhouse already feels protective. A young woman carrying a basket of wooden wedges passes by. You notice she has tucked sprigs of dried herbs at her belt. She sets the basket down and hands wedges to the men securing the next posts. There are hints in old Norse stories that some builders believed certain herbs brought luck to new homes. Whether or not that superstition held practical value, it gave a sense of ceremony to the process. And for this group, the ritual adds a subtle calm to the cold morning. You follow her as she returns to the other end of the structure where more posts are being set. You can see clearly now how the longhouse will stretch from one side of the clearing to the other. It will be spacious, not grand but deeply functional. A wide central hall will anchor the interior. Sleeping spaces will line the sides. The hearth will sit near the center. Livestock will occupy the far end, their body heat drifting upward into the shared air. This layout appears over and over in ruins across the North Atlantic. It is one of the most recognizable footprints of Viking settlement. As the beams rise, you begin to sense more of the longhouse's personality. It leans into the wind instead of resisting it. It sinks into the earth rather than towering above it. And it knows how to conserve warmth, the way a careful person conserves breath in freezing air. That is the beauty of this structure. It is not fighting the environment. It is working with it. You crouch near where the central hearth will eventually sit. The ground is bare now, but you can already imagine the glow of flames filling this space, reflecting off wood and turf. Warming faces leaned close to the fire. You know instinctively that this hearth will become the emotional and physical core of the home. It is where conversations will unfold in low voices, where stories will be shared, where children will curl close to heat, and where food will simmer through long winter hours. Behind you, the Vikings grunt as they lift another beam into place. The sound echoes softly between the surrounding trees. The forest seems to lean in, watching. You take a step back and admire how the posts now form a rhythmic line, almost like ribs of a giant animal slowly taking shape. The clearing feels different now, less open, more intimate. The longhouse outline pulls the eye inward, drawing focus toward the life that will soon inhabit it. One builder invites you to help steady a log as they adjust the next joint. You place your hands against the cold wood, feeling the rough bark scrape your palms. The log shifts slightly, then settles into place with a deep, satisfying thump. The man beside you nods approvingly. A quiet moment passes, filled with the shared understanding that every piece fitted today brings the future warmth a little closer. When you step back again, the longhouse outline looks real. The beams rise like a silent promise. The walls will soon thicken. The roof will soon shelter. And this land, once nothing but harsh wind and brittle frost, is no longer empty. It is becoming a home. You take a slow breath, the cold crisp against your lungs, and realize that the transformation has already begun. And with every log, every wedge, every careful measurement, you feel the story deepening, drawing you further into the place where warmth will soon be made from wood, earth, and human determination. You stand near the center of the clearing as the frame of the longhouse continues to rise, and already you can feel how everything in this place seems to point toward one thing. Not the walls, not the roof, not the cattle stalls or the sleeping platforms. It is the hearth that calls your attention, the future fire that will glow like a warm pulse beneath the winter sky. Even now, before a single ember has been struck, You sense its importance, settling in your mind the way embers settle in a bed of coals. You walk toward the open space where it will live, your boots crunching through frost while the Vikings gather stones from the nearby stream. They bring the stones in armloads, dropping them with soft clacks onto the frozen earth. Each one is chosen with surprising care. Flat stones are placed to make a stable base. Rounded ones are discarded. You kneel and run your fingertips along a piece of dark river rock. It is cold, smooth, and slightly damp. When this stone heats up, it will radiate warmth long after the flames die down. A detail that scholars often point out is that Viking hearths were not merely for cooking. They were the sole source of life inside a winter home. They gave heat, light, comfort, and the means to boil water and prepare food day after day. Without a functioning hearth, even the strongest walls could protect you only so long. The Vikings begin aligning stones in a loose circle, creating the shallow basin where fires will burn. Their movements are quiet and deliberate. One man steps back and squints as if measuring the shape with his eyes alone. Another shifts a rock slightly to prevent wobbling. A woman crouches to check the airflow beneath the stones, making sure that the fire will breathe easily. It becomes clear that the hearth is not simply placed in the middle. It must sit at a point where smoke can travel upward without being trapped, yet close enough to the central living area that everyone can gather around it. You breathe in the cold air, and imagine how this place will soon smell of wood smoke, stew, and warm fur. A curious little detail preserved in some sagas suggests that in certain early settlements, people sprinkled crushed shells or fine sand beneath the hearthstones to keep sparks from traveling across the floor. Whether this was superstition or practical foresight, no one can say with certainty. Even so, you watch one of the builders pour a thin layer of coarse gravel beneath the rocks. It crunches softly as he spreads it with his palm. The others nod with quiet approval, and you get the sense that this layer, though simple, is a part of tradition carried from village to village. The Vikings pause to warm their hands on each other's shoulders, rubbing fingers stiffened by the cold. There is a hum of shared determination in the air. You notice how they keep glancing at the sky. Clouds drift lazily, thick enough to promise colder nights to come, but thin enough to let patches of pale blue show through. They know winter will tighten its grip soon. They know they must finish this hearth before the temperature drops further. For them, this is not just a project. It is a race against nature. You crouch again to examine the stones as they fit together. You can already imagine the glow filling this small pit, flames licking upward with soft crackles. You can almost hear the faint snapping of pine resin and the low murmurs of people settling close to the warmth. The hearth will shape every part of daily life. Meals will be prepared here, tools dried here, wounds treated beside it. Conversations whispered late into long, dark nights will drift into its heat. Families will gather, share stories, and rest wrapped in blankets while snowstorms howl outside. One builder holds up a piece of driftwood to test its dryness. He snaps it and listens to the crisp break. Then he nods and sets it aside for the first fire. A well-known fact among those who study northern cultures is that Vikings understood wood moisture better than many modern campers. They knew which trees burned hottest, which smoked too much, and how long certain woods needed to dry before use. Pine burns hot but fast. Birch burns steady, but produces a resinous smoke. Driftwood, while plentiful, can sometimes contain salt that eats at iron tools. Every choice shapes the warmth of the home. A small boy wanders near the hearth space carrying a bundle of twigs. His face is red from the cold, but his eyes shine with excitement. He places the twigs carefully on the ground and steps back proudly. The adults ruffle his hair and thank him softly. The gesture tells you everything about how central fire is to these people. Even children sense its importance. It is not a luxury. It is survival woven into their stories and their everyday habits. As the frame of the longhouse grows taller around you, the hearth space feels like an anchor. It steadies the entire structure, even though it has not yet been lit. You imagine how the rafters above will guide smoke toward a small vent. Some regions built stone-lined chimneys. Others relied on simple openings in the roof, letting smoke drift out slowly while keeping most heat inside. A debate still lingers among archaeologists about how efficiently these vents worked. Some argue that the smoke would have lingered in the upper rafters, creating a warm, smoky canopy that preserved meat hanging overhead. Others believe venting was more controlled and deliberate. Standing here, you look upward at the rising beams and can almost picture the smoke gathering, coiling, and finally slipping outside through a narrow slit in the roof. The Vikings begin assembling a low barrier of stones around the hearth's edge. This small circular wall will hold burning logs in place and keep embers from rolling across the packed earth floor. You run your palm along one of the stones, feeling tiny grains of ice melt beneath your touch. The texture is rough, grounding. You picture the countless fires that will burn here, each flame reflecting off this same stone in shifting shades of orange and gold. The woman with the herbs returns, brushing loose snow from her sleeves. She sprinkles dried leaves into the gravel near the stones. The scent rises faintly, warm and earthy, with hints of chamomile and something sharper you cannot name. She murmurs a few soft words under her breath. Whether this is a blessing or simply a personal habit, you do not ask. You simply watch. In places where winter is harsh enough to humble even the strongest, people often combine practicality with ritual. It makes the cold feel less personal, less threatening. The group steps back at last, looking at the circle they have built. It is small, no bigger than the space needed to boil water or roast meat, but it feels weighty, essential. You look at it too, and your breath catches briefly. This is where warmth will begin. This is where stories will unfold. This is where every night of winter survival will find its center. You kneel and place your hand on one of the stones. It is cold now. Soon it will be warm, then hot, then glowing from within as fire does its ancient work. You can almost feel the future heat radiating into your bones. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine sitting here on a stormy night, wrapped in wool, listening to the crackle of flames while snow piles against the walls outside. You imagine drifting to sleep to the soft murmur of voices around the fire, the warmth holding winter at bay. When you rise again, the hearth is ready. It waits patiently, a silent heart that will soon begin to beat. You return to the longhouse frame later in the afternoon, the sky washed in a pale, icy blue that makes every outline look sharper than usual. The posts stand firm, the beams stretch confidently overhead, and in the center the hearthstones wait patiently for their first spark. But as you walk through the growing structure, your eyes drift upward, tracing the path smoke will soon take. The Vikings gather near the roofline, discussing how to guide smoke out while keeping as much warmth inside as possible. It is one of the most delicate challenges in building a winter home, letting the fire breathe without letting the cold steal everything it gives. You stand beneath a pair of rafters, imagining the path that rising smoke will travel. Without any vent, smoke would gather, coil, and eventually fill the longhouse, until eyes stung and voices rasped. Too large an opening, and the precious heat would vanish into the sky. Somewhere between those extremes lies the balance these settlers must find. You tilt your head back, watching the builders carve a narrow slit near the peak of the frame. The wood shavings fall like tiny snowflakes, scattering across your cloak. One practical detail widely known among people who study early northern homes is that smoke vents were often little more than adjustable openings in the roof. No tall chimneys, no complex stone stacks. Just a gap that could be widened during cooking and narrowed when the night grew bitter. You can picture someone reaching up with a hooked stick to push or pull a wooden flap, adjusting the flow of air while the fire cracked below. Simple, but effective. The Vikings argue softly in their own language about how wide the opening should be. One man gestures dramatically toward the rafters, insisting that too small a vent will trap smoke and ruin the meat hung overhead for drying. Another shakes his head, reminding him that winter winds could blast through any careless gap. Their voices rise and fall like waves lapping a rocky shore. A lingering disagreement exists among modern researchers too, concerning exactly how these vents were controlled. Some believe there were movable slats. Others argue for hanging skins pulled aside like curtains. Standing here, listening to the debate, you realize the same uncertainty existed even among builders themselves. A young builder climbs the frame and begins fastening a pair of wooden planks on either side of the opening. The planks lean at angles designed to deflect wind. You can almost feel the breeze shifting around them, broken gently so it enters softly instead of slamming into the house. You reach out and steady one of the support beams while he works. The wood feels cold under your palm, but it is solid, unyielding. When the vent is finished, it looks deceptively simple, just a small, narrow line of open sky. Yet without it, the longhouse would choke. As the builders step back to check their work, one woman kneels near the hearth to explain something to a younger worker. You drift toward them, listening. She draws a line in the frost to show how heat rises in a column. Then she draws another line to represent drafts sneaking in from low doorways. If the vent sits directly above the hearth, smoke rises cleanly. If the opening is offset, the smoke will drift sideways and spread along the rafters. She taps her drawing with a stick, and you sense the practicality in her words. These people understand airflow with the same instinct. Others understand fishing or farming. You walk around the interior, feeling how cool the air still is. It will not stay cool for long. Once the hearth is lit and the vent begins to breathe, this space will change. The air will warm slowly, clinging first to the stones, then to the sod walls, then to the heavy wooden beams overhead. The longhouse will begin to feel alive. You pause under one of the high beams, letting your gaze follow the rising shape of the roof. A faint smell of resin hangs in the air from freshly cut wood. You inhale deeply, letting the scent settle into your senses. It is sharp and clean, a reminder of the forest still clinging to the structure. You listen to the murmur of work around you and feel the longhouse taking on personality, shaped by the choices made in this very moment. Nearby, a small group discusses whether to hang a curtain of woven reed beneath the vent. Reed mats were sometimes used in early homes to help diffuse smoke while still allowing it to escape. You glance at the bundle of reeds lying against a log, their golden stems stiff and dry. If hung loosely, they would sway with the rising heat, letting thin streams of smoke slip through while slowing down gusts of wind. One man lifts the reeds, shakes them gently, and nods with satisfaction. That seems like approval. You follow him as he carries the bundle toward the center. He holds a few strands up to the light, checking their flexibility. If reeds crack too easily, they will not last the winter. These, however, bend with a soft sighing sound. He smiles faintly and hands them to a woman who begins weaving them into a simple panel. Her fingers move quickly, the reeds crossing in a rhythm that reminds you of fabric being woven on a loom. She hums quietly as she works, a tune that carries a hint of warmth despite the cold around her. As she hangs the finished mat near the vent, you marvel at how these small additions shape the quality of the air. When smoke rises, it will swirl gently against the reeds, spread into thin wisps, and drift out without leaving thick clouds inside. At the same time, wind trying to sneak in will break against the woven surface, softened before entering the home. The arrangement feels almost delicate, yet it is crafted for strength. She hums quietly as she works, a tune that carries a hint of warmth despite the cold around her. You step back and admire the growing complexity of this simple opening. Wood guides the wind, reeds shape the smoke, hide softens the draft. Together, they transform a narrow slit into a carefully managed airway. The longhouse now feels like a living creature that inhales and exhales with intention. For a moment you imagine the home in the depths of winter. Snow drifts against the walls, muffling sound. Inside, the hearth glows red. Smoke curls upward in thin ribbons, shimmering in the warm air. It gathers near the roofline, darkening the beams slightly before drifting out through the vent. Each breath of smoke carries the scent of wood, stew, and woolen clothing. Children sleep near the walls, wrapped in blankets. Adults talk in low voices, their sentences rising softly into the warm haze. Above them, the vent works steadily, letting the home breathe without surrendering its heat. As you look upward again, the sky beyond the opening has turned a deeper shade of blue, almost purple. Evening is approaching. The Vikings wipe snow from their hands and take a step back, admiring their work. The vent is complete. It is small, modest, easy to overlook, yet it will decide how comfortable the longhouse will be on the coldest nights. Without it, the fire would burn poorly. With it, the entire home becomes a place of safety. You walk beneath the rafters once more, feeling the faint chill that still lingers. Soon that chill will fade. Soon the vent will carry smoke upward while the hearth warms every corner. Soon the longhouse will shelter its first night of life. And as you leave the clearing, the sky darkening above you, you can already picture the long curling trails of smoke rising from this place, whispering into the winter air that a home has been born. You return to the longhouse at first light, the frost on the ground glittering like crushed glass beneath your boots. The frame stands proudly now, its ribs of timber reaching toward the pale morning sky. The hearth waits patiently in its center, and the smoke vent above it looks like a narrow eye watching the world. But before this home can trap warm air, it needs one more layer of cleverness. You notice a group of Vikings gathering long, straight planks from yesterday's pile. Their faces are calm, focused, as if they know this next step will decide just how cozy this place will be when winter claws at the walls. You walk closer, brushing your gloved fingers along the timber. It is cold, rough, and slightly damp from the night. Soon these planks will become the double-layered walling system that gives Viking homes their signature warmth. You watch as the builders lay two sets of vertical timbers side by side, leaving a small space between them. This space, invisible yet powerful, is the secret you are here to witness. A well-known detail among those who study ancient northern architecture is that the Vikings often created walls with two skins, an outer layer to battle the wind and an inner layer to hold the heat. The gap between them might be just a few inches wide, but it changes everything. Air trapped inside becomes a silent guardian, slowing the escape of warmth and softening the harshest winter gusts. You lean close and run your hand along the inner plank, imagining the warmth that will eventually radiate from it. As the builders begin fitting the first boards, you hear the steady beat of wooden mallets striking pegs. Each thump vibrates through the air, rhythmic and reassuring. The outer planks stand like shields, thick and sturdy. The inner ones curve slightly inward, giving the room a gentle sense of embrace. You step between the two layers, feeling the narrowness of the space. It is surprising how a simple air pocket can become such an effective insulation strategy, yet here you are, standing inside the future warmth trap. One builder crouches beside you, tapping the wood lightly with his knuckles. He listens to the sound, nods, and adjusts the plank's alignment. You realize he is checking how tightly the wood fits, making sure no gaps remain where cold air might slip inside. He gestures for you to feel the edge of the plank. You touch it, noticing the smoothness of the groove carved to meet its neighbor. The Vikings are working with tools that may seem simple, but their craftsmanship is anything but crude. As the wall rises, you notice the builders occasionally stuffing small tufts of dried moss into narrow spaces. They press it in with the tips of their fingers. You tilt your head, curious, and one of the women smiles as she walks past, explaining that moss makes an excellent draft stopper. In some old regions, people believed that certain types of moss also kept spirits from slipping through cracks at night. Whether that belief held any real importance or not, using moss remains clever. It expands when damp and contracts when dry, sealing tiny gaps naturally. Another detail some archaeologists point out is that the Vikings sometimes lined the inner walls with woven mats or animal hides. These items provided an additional layer of heat retention, especially during the darkest months. As you watch a group bring out rolled hides from a storage bundle, you can already see how they will soften the wooden interior and help hold warmth like a thick blanket wrapped around the home. The builders take a moment to stretch their arms, rolling their shoulders and rubbing their hands together to chase off the cold. Their breath clouds in the air, drifting upward like faint whispers. You shift your weight and lean against one of the inner beams, feeling the sturdy reassurance of its presence. Soon, these walls will cradle the entire family, shielding them from the icy wind that rips through the landscape every winter. You imagine sitting near them during a storm, feeling the warmth pulse through the wooden surface while snow pelts the outside layer. You wander around the exterior, watching the Viking craftsmen attach the outer planks. They align them vertically so that rain and melted snow drip down easily instead of pooling. A few of them discuss whether to char the bottom edges of the planks. Some old traditions suggested that lightly burning the wood drove away insects and added rot resistance. The idea intrigues you. You pick up a small plank and imagine holding it over a flickering flame, feeling the heat prick your fingers while the surface darkens and hardens. A thoughtful debate arises among the group regarding whether to fill the cavity between the two wall layers with loose fibers or leave it empty. Some argue that stuffing the gap with straw or wool scraps would increase insulation. Others counter that leaving the space hollow prevents moisture buildup. You listen to their voices rise and fall with interest. Even among modern experts, this question continues to spark lively disagreement. Some studies suggest that air gaps work best when left clear, while others believe added material boosts performance. The Vikings seem just as divided. You step back to watch them settle on a method. Today, they choose a mixed approach. They leave most of the wall cavity hollow but tuck small bundles of insulated fibers into the corners where cold finds its sneakiest entry points. You admire the adaptability of their approach. They are not rigid. They adjust with every piece of evidence their hands discover. One man reaches for a long wooden brace, lifts it to the wall, and wedges it gently into place. You hear the faint squeak of wood rubbing against wood. He steps back, checks the alignment, then drives in a peg with a satisfying crack. You place your palm against the outer wall. It is cold now, but the strength is undeniable. You picture snow trying to push its way in and failing. You picture the bitter wind striking the wall and losing its momentum against the double barrier. The Vikings add horizontal beams at intervals, creating a grid that reinforces the wall while helping it resist shifting under heavy snow loads. You follow the beams with your eyes, tracing their pattern along the length of the longhouse. It looks almost like a giant wooden basket turned upright, each piece working with the others to hold warmth captive. Inside, the inner wall curves softly toward the hearth, shaping the airflow in ways you can almost feel. You imagine sitting against it at night, letting your back absorb the gentle heat that lingers even after the fire dies down. You close your eyes for a moment and picture the soft crackling of embers, the low hum of conversation, the rustle of blankets, the quiet peace of a winter evening inside this shelter. A sudden gust of wind sweeps across the clearing, tugging at your cloak. Snowflakes scatter through the air, catching the light like silver dust. The longhouse does not flinch. Its double walls stand firm, ready to fight the cold. You smile softly, realizing you are witnessing a perfect marriage of simplicity and genius. No complicated machinery, no exotic materials, just wood, moss, air, and human insight. You linger as the day fades, the walls growing taller with each passing hour. The home is beginning to feel enclosed now. The air inside holds stillness. The outside world seems distant. As you step through the doorway beam, you feel a shift as subtle as a heartbeat. You are inside something now, something protective, something warm in spirit even before the fire has been lit. You look over your shoulder at the finished sections of double walls and feel a deep, quiet appreciation. They may not look like much from afar, just planks stacked together, but you know the truth. These walls are guardians. They hold the memory of every hand that shaped them and the warmth of every fire they will shelter. Soon the roof will settle over them, sealing the longhouse like a wooden cocoon. But for now, you stand between two layers of future warmth, listening to the calm strength of the home rising around you. You step back into the longhouse just as the builders begin turning their attention to the far end of the structure. The walls rise steadily, the roof beams lean toward one another like hands joining in prayer, and the hearth sits quietly at the center, waiting for its first true test. But now the Vikings focus on something equally essential to surviving the cold: the animals that will live under the same roof. You breathe in the crisp air and follow them to the section reserved for livestock. The scent of hay drifts across your senses, mingling with the earthy smell of sod and timber. The Vikings walk with quiet confidence, gesturing toward the rear portion of the longhouse. This space will become the byre, a sheltered area where cattle, goats, and sheep will stay during the winter months. You feel the importance of this moment as you follow them inside. Livestock are more than food sources. They are heaters wrapped in fur. Their warmth will drift upward, seeping into the human living quarters with a steady, comforting presence. A detail frequently mentioned by historians of northern settlements is that many longhouses had shared spaces for animals and people, not out of affection, though affection surely grew, but out of necessity. In a climate where temperatures could plunge until even breath seemed to freeze, the body heat of a few cows could raise the temperature of a living area by several degrees. You run your hand along a newly placed dividing beam, imagining how that warmth will rise like a soft tide each night. You watch as the Vikings begin leveling the floor on the animal side. Their boots crunch across the uneven ground, kicking away frost and loose stones. They smooth the surface with wooden rakes, spreading a thick layer of straw. The straw crackles softly under their touch, releasing a warm, dry scent that seems to soften the cold air. You crouch down, gathering a handful of it. The fibers are surprisingly strong, each piece carrying the faint aroma of summer fields long gone. A few of the younger workers fetch bundles of reeds from the riverbank. They tie them together to create simple mats that will line the partitions. You tilt your head, curious, and one of the older women explains with a smile that these mats help absorb moisture and reduce drafts. She drapes the reeds along the post, spreading them with careful fingers. They rustle with a whispering sound, like dry leaves dancing in a warm breeze. As you watch, a young man points to the dividing beam and begins discussing how high it should stand. Some argue that a higher barrier prevents animals from wandering into the living area. Others believe a lower one improves airflow. Sides are chosen with playful jabs and teasing comments, and soon a small debate forms. This same question appears in archaeological studies as well. Some ruins reveal high partitions, sturdy enough to lean against. Others show much lower barriers, almost like benches separating the spaces. No universal answer exists, only variations shaped by region and preference. Eventually, the builders settle on a waist-high partition. It feels sturdy under your touch, yet open enough to let the warm air drift. You can almost imagine the animals settling here, their steady breathing filling the space with a gentle rhythm. One of the men pats the beam and murmurs that cows make better housemates than some distant relatives. The others laugh, and for a moment the cold seems to lift. You step to the edge of the living area and look over the partition. The space feels large and welcoming. The floor slants slightly toward a shallow trench that runs along the edge. You kneel and trace the trench with your fingertips. It provides simple drainage for the byre, directing liquid waste out of the structure. This small but vital design detail appears again and again in excavated longhouse sites. It is practical, modest, and deeply effective. The Vikings bring in small wooden racks next. They place them near the byre wall, securing them with pegs. These will hold winter hay, keeping it dry and reachable. You can almost hear the gentle munching of livestock in your imagination, a steady, comforting sound on nights when storms rattle the roof and icy winds whistle through cracks too small for the eye to see. A child wanders into the byre space, dragging a piece of wool cloth behind him. He waves it like a flag, and declares that the cows will be honored guests. His mother chuckles, picks him up, and brushes straw from his hair. You smile, imagining how much warmth children must have felt lying near the hearth while animals slept at the far end, their breath rising into the rafters, mixing with smoke and soft light. You run your hands along the beams once more as the Vikings begin reinforcing the byre walls. Thick wood meets thick sod. The textures feel grounding, strong, alive. You imagine how, once winter descends fully, the animals will gather here, their bodies pressed together, their steady heat slowly radiating outward. It will warm the floors, warm the air, and rise into the human living quarters like an invisible fire. One of the older men taps the side of the partition and tells a brief, slightly amusing story about a goat that once escaped its enclosure during a storm. It spent an entire night sleeping on someone's bed, warming itself by the fire. This little memory makes you grin, and it reminds you that life in these longhouses was not just about survival. It was filled with moments of humor and unexpected companionship. As the byre takes shape, you begin to sense a deeper truth about Viking homes. They are not cold, rigid structures built against the land. They are living systems, carefully designed to capture every possible source of warmth. Stone, turf, wood, fire, bodies, even animals. Everything works together. You take a step back, letting the scene settle into your senses. The straw-covered floor, the sturdy partitions, the faint, sweet smell of dried reeds, the slow, thoughtful voices of people building a future. You picture the longhouse in the heart of winter, children curled near the hearth, adults weaving or carving by firelight, animals shifting softly behind the partition, snow piling thick outside, wind pressing at the walls, and inside, the warm breath of man and beast mingling, creating a cocoon of life in a world of ice. The byre is complete enough to imagine clearly. You place your palm on the partition one last time. The wood is cold now, but soon it will hold the warmth of many bodies. You turn toward the rest of the longhouse, the air crisp in your lungs, and realize something simple yet profound. This home is not being built for people alone. It is being built for the entire living community that makes winter survival possible. And as the Vikings gather their tools to prepare for the next task, you feel a quiet warmth inside you, a warmth that comes not from fire but from understanding. You rise with the pale morning light filtering through unfinished rafters, and as you step inside the longhouse, you can sense a shift in the rhythm of the builders. The walls stand firm now, the byre feels ready to welcome animals, and the air is thick with the scent of fresh timber. Today, though, the Vikings turn their attention downward. You watch as they kneel on the cold earth floor, touching it with the tips of their fingers the way a healer might check a pulse. The ground is frozen, stiff in some places and soft in others. And right now, this uneven, icy floor is the enemy. If the floor stays cold, everything else will follow. You take a slow step forward and crouch beside them, brushing your palm across the packed soil. It feels like iron beneath your hand. You imagine sleeping above this in winter, wrapped in wool but still feeling the cold rise into your bones. And you understand instantly why the Vikings developed clever tricks to turn frozen earth into a gentle, radiant heat source. Several of them begin hauling baskets filled with smooth river stones from the nearby stream. Each stone is rounded, heavy, and cold enough to sting your fingertips. They heap the stones into a pile near the center of the longhouse, close to where the hearth will burn. One of the women gestures to the stones with quiet pride and explains how, once heated, they will hold warmth for hours, sometimes even through the night. It is a simple idea, but you feel its brilliance settle into you like a spark. A detail frequently mentioned by archaeologists who study northern dwellings is that Vikings sometimes buried heated stones beneath layers of sand or packed earth, creating a primitive but effective thermal floor. You watch as the builders dig shallow pits in key areas, forming pockets where stones will rest. These pits are not deep, but they are large enough to cradle the stones in a deliberate pattern, each piece touching others so that heat can pass along them like a quiet message. It is a simple idea, but you feel its brilliance settle into you like a spark. You picture families sitting cross-legged on winter nights, their toes warm despite the storm outside. A few of the younger workers drag wooden trays filled with coarse sand into the longhouse. The sand pours like gritty gold, spilling onto the floor with a muted hiss. They spread it evenly over the ground, leveling low areas and smoothing sharp ridges. You kneel and take a handful. It is cold and granular, but it feels clean, almost soft. Sand helps regulate moisture, prevents mud, and even adds a little insulation. You spread your fingers through it, feeling the subtle warmth of friction between the grains. As the Vikings continue shaping the pits, they begin placing cold stones inside to test the arrangement. The stones bump softly against each other. You help adjust a few, your hands brushing against damp soil. The builders want the stones to nestle together, not wobble. Every pocket must hold its shape, resisting movement even when the floor shifts slightly under the weight of people walking. A curious detail preserved in some old accounts is that certain settlements used flat slabs of shale or slate as radiant floor panels. These stones heated quickly and stayed warm for hours. Whether or not that was common across all regions remains uncertain. Some experts believe it was a regional practice rather than a universal technique. Still, as you watch a group unload a few thin, flat stones from a sled, you realize this longhouse will incorporate several approaches to warmth. The builders lay the flat stones in a corner near the living area, tapping them into place with mallets. Each strike sends a deep, solid note through the air. The stones fit together like puzzle pieces, forming a smooth surface that will warm easily when firelight reaches it. You touch one, and its coldness makes you imagine the comfort it will soon bring when heated. As the work continues, you sense the floor slowly transforming. The pits take shape. The sand spreads evenly. The hard earth softens into something more welcoming. You stand in the center of the longhouse and notice how the space feels more grounded now. The builders have shifted their attention from vertical height to horizontal warmth. It is a subtle change, but powerful. A woman with braided hair kneels by one of the pits and places her palm on a stone. She tells you a small story about her grandmother, who claimed heated stones had spirits inside them. According to the tale, stones held memories because they endured for so long. Warm them, and they would share a kind of gentle presence with the home. Whether the story was meant to teach children not to touch hot stones or whether it carried deeper meaning, you cannot say. But as you listen, you feel a tenderness in the idea. But as you listen, you feel a tenderness in the idea. Once the pits are shaped and the stones are arranged, the Vikings begin covering them with a mixture of sand and dirt. This layer traps heat, releasing it slowly across the surface. You help scoop soil onto the stones, feeling the grains slip between your fingers. The scent of earth clings to your gloves. In the cold morning air, even that faint smell of warmth feels hopeful. The builders move around the space, checking each section with their palms, making sure the floor feels even. They take pride in this invisible work. It will not be seen when the home is complete, but it will be felt every night, radiating comfort upward like the quiet glow of embers. One of the older men pauses to explain that floors like this reduce the shock of stepping out of bed in the morning. In a world where the wind cuts like a blade, such small comforts matter. You smile softly at the thought. You picture waking up to the scent of smoke, the hush of falling snow outside, and the warm floor beneath your feet. It feels like a luxury born from simple materials and thoughtful hands. A gentle debate begins among the builders about whether to place woven mats over the finished floor. Some argue that mats add softness and help trap heat. Others insist that mats trap moisture and need careful attention. This same question appears in academic circles as well. Some excavations suggest that mats were common, while others show bare earth polished, smooth by years of footsteps. You listen to both sides, feeling the charm of these small disagreements that shape the comfort of daily life. As they settle on a compromise, placing mats only where sleeping platforms will be, you wander toward the hearth area. The floor here is especially important. Too much insulation, and the fire might struggle to breathe. Too little, and heat will vanish into the ground. The builders carefully shape the soil, smoothing it with long strokes. You crouch down, pressing your palm against the ground. You feel the faint promise of future warmth. You rise slowly, the cold air brushing against your cheeks. The longhouse feels different now. The walls give strength, the roof beams promise shelter, and the floor offers quiet warmth rising from below. It is not just a surface to walk on, it is part of the home's heartbeat. You take one last step across the packed earth, your boots sinking slightly into the fresh layer of soil. The air around you hums with possibility. Soon, fire will heat the stones. Soon, the floor will glow with invisible warmth. Soon, families will sit here, wrapped in blankets, feeling the gentle comfort rising from beneath them even when snow piles up outside. And as you leave the longhouse, you carry with you the quiet truth that the Vikings did not simply build walls and roofs. They created warmth from the ground up, shaping the earth itself into a silent ally against the cold. You return to the longhouse in the late afternoon, when the light hangs low and soft across the half-finished roof beams. The floor has settled into its new shape. The byre feels ready for its winter guests, and the double walls stand confidently like guardians. But as you step inside, the cold air touches your cheeks with a sharp reminder. Walls and floors matter, yes, but without the right clothing, the Vikings would still freeze long before the fire warms the room. Today, the builders and their families gather near the hearth space, not to raise beams or carve joints, but to talk about the most intimate layer of winter survival: wool, fur, and the subtle craft of layering. You lower yourself onto a freshly smoothed section of floor and run your fingers across the edge of a woolen cloak one of the women has set aside. The fiber is coarse at first touch, but when you press deeper, you feel its density, its warmth, the slight give of lanolin still clinging to the strands. You bring it closer to your cheek and feel a surprising softness beneath the surface scratch. No matter how strong the longhouse becomes, it is this fabric that will cling closest to the skin in the middle of winter. A familiar detail often mentioned in studies of Viking life is that wool was the true lifeline of the north. It came from sheep tough enough to graze wind-blasted hillsides, and the resulting fiber transformed into textiles capable of holding heat even when damp. You watch as a group of women pull long strands of wool from baskets, teasing them into fluffy clouds. Their hands move with practiced grace, fingers separating fibers in gentle motions that feel almost meditative. One young woman sits beside you and hands you a few tufts of raw wool. You roll it between your fingers. Tiny bits of grass cling to the fibers. The scent is faintly earthy, like rain on a hillside. She smiles as she shows you how to draw the wool into a thin line, twisting it slightly so it begins to take shape. You mimic the motion, and though your line is uneven, she nods in encouragement. You watch her spin the fibers into sturdy yarn, the spindle whirling softly in her hands. The motion is rhythmic, hypnotic, calming in a way you did not expect. Nearby, another woman kneels with a fur pelt draped over her lap. She brushes the strands gently, checking its thickness. You run a hand over the fur. It is warm immediately, the kind of warmth that wraps itself around your fingers. She explains that furs line boots, cloaks, and sleeping platforms. They become the first barrier against bitter wind. The Vikings knew, through lived experience, that fur traps heat in a way wool cannot match. Wool breathes. Fur shelters. Together, they create a protective layering system that turns bodies into warm islands within the frozen world. A small fire crackles in a temporary pit near the center of the longhouse. Builders gather around it with their cloaks wrapped tightly. One man lifts the edge of his cloak and shows how its weave repels water. The cloth beads the melting frost, letting droplets roll off easily. You lift a corner of your own garment and try the same. A few drops cling stubbornly, and you laugh quietly. Your cloak has not seen the same careful treatment of lanolin and oil. As you listen to their discussions, you notice that layering is an art in itself. A soft undertunic sits close to the skin. Above it, a thicker woolen layer wraps the torso. Then fur-lined cloaks carry the final weight. Each piece traps pockets of warm air, holding heat like blessings. One of the older builders lifts his sleeve to show the stitching inside. The seams are thick and reinforced, preventing drafts from creeping in along the edges. A detail found in some preserved garments hints that Vikings used double seams not just for strength, but to add subtle insulation. A group of children huddle near a pile of winter gear, giggling as they try on cloaks far too large for them. One child stumbles, disappearing under the heavy folds of wool. Laughter rises around you, warm and bright. You help lift the cloak from the child's shoulders, revealing his flushed cheeks and wide grin. He pats the wool proudly and announces to no one in particular that someday he will wear it in a snowstorm. You ruffle his hair gently. You walk toward a low bench where a man is stretching a piece of leather. The leather is stiff at first, but he softens it with steady pressure and gentle heat from a nearby ember. He says that good boots matter as much as thick walls. Cold feet can break even the strongest person. You feel the truth of his words in your bones. He shows you a layered boot insert made of felted wool and dried grasses. You squeeze the insert and feel its softness, its springiness. He tucks it inside a tall boot and explains how it traps warm air close to the foot, keeping frostbite at bay. A small, intriguing detail preserved in folklore suggests that some households lined their boots with crushed juniper leaves for warmth and scent. Whether this was practical or merely pleasant, no one knows for certain, but the builders here smile as a woman scatters a handful of dried juniper into a pair of boots. The scent rises immediately, sharp and clean, reminding you of pine forests under a thin blanket of snow. As the talk continues, a thoughtful discussion breaks out among the group about which materials hold heat best. Some insist that fine, tightly spun wool is superior. Others argue that fur retains warmth more efficiently. One man claims that layering wool beneath fur gives the perfect balance. A woman counters that too much layering restricts movement during chores. You listen to the friendly debate, noticing how similar disagreements echo in scholarly circles today. Even experts cannot fully agree on the most efficient Viking winter clothing combinations, especially since regional preferences varied widely. You run your hand along another cloak laid out on a bench. The texture is rich and firm. The edges are bound with leather strips, each stitch perfectly even. You imagine how heavy it will feel during a blizzard, how comforting it will be when wind howls outside the longhouse. You picture stepping out at dawn, breath turning to clouds, snow creaking beneath your boots, and feeling the thick wool hug your body like a warm embrace. A young woman approaches with a basket of dried herbs. She sprinkles a few into a bag of wool, explaining that herbs help keep moths away during storage. She mentions lavender, mugwort, and certain hardy northern plants that release sharp scents disliked by insects. You lift a handful of the mix to your nose. The scent is strong but refreshing, cutting through the cold air. As you wander back toward the hearth area, the temporary fire glows brighter, sending waves of warmth across your face. You watch as the Vikings drape their cloaks near the heat to soften the fibers. Some twist their cloaks in careful motions, redistributing oils throughout the weave. The room fills with a faint smoky fragrance mixed with the scent of wool, fur, and dried plants. It is the smell of winter preparation. You sit beside the hearthstones, letting the warmth seep into your hands. Around you, woolen tunics rustle, furs shift gently, and conversations blend into a soft chorus. Clothing, you realize, is not simply protection. It is memory, skill, tradition, and comfort woven together. It is the difference between enduring winter and living through it fully. As the day grows dim, you close your eyes briefly and imagine the longhouse in the deep of winter, families wrapped in layered wool, children tucked beneath fur blankets, warm floors beneath them, a fire crackling steadily, snow pressing against the walls outside, and in the darkness, the quiet certainty that every stitch of every garment carries the knowledge and strength of generations. You open your eyes again and breathe deeply. The scent of wool hangs in the air like a promise. The longhouse feels warmer already, not from fire, but from the preparation unfolding around you. You step outside for a brief moment, letting the crisp morning air sting your cheeks before returning to the longhouse. When you walk back inside, you look upward instinctively, because today the builders are turning their attention to the roof. Not the beams or the supports this time, but the covering itself, the layer that will protect the longhouse from snow, rain, and cold. You watch as bundles of dried grasses, reeds, and straw pile up near the doorway, each bundle tied neatly with twine. These will become the thatch, the quiet masterpiece that rests above the home like a warm, breathing blanket. You brush your fingers across one of the bundles. The stalks feel dry and feather-light, but when compressed, they form a dense, springy mass. You can already imagine how they will soften the roar of the winter wind. A commonly known insight among those who study old northern dwellings is that Viking roof thatching was not random. It was layered with intention, arranged tightly to repel water, and angled to help snow slide off before the weight could damage the structure. The craft has survived into modern times in some parts of Scandinavia, where thatched roofs still protect homes from fierce storms. A small group of builders carries the first bundles up wooden ladders leaning against the rafters. They move with a calm steadiness, balancing each load on their shoulders. You tilt your head back and watch them tie the thatch into place with long cords. The sound of straw brushing against wood fills the air, a soft rustling that reminds you of tall grass shifting in a summer breeze. Standing on the floor below, you notice how the first layer of thatch lies thickly across the rafters. It is placed with the roots facing upward, a technique one of the older builders explains to you with a nod. He says the stiff ends point toward the weather, while the soft tips rest beneath other layers. This helps water run down easily and keeps the interior dry. He hands you a bundle, and you feel its weight increase when compressed. Even though it seems delicate, the tightly packed bundle becomes surprisingly heavy when fixed into place. As more bundles rise overhead, the longhouse begins to dim. The sunlight filtering through becomes softer, scattered by the straw-like light shining through warm-colored glass. You step closer to the wall and examine the thatch from underneath. Each layer overlaps the one below it, creating a thick mat that will soon reach several hands deep. You tap the underside with your knuckles, and the roof responds with a muted, almost comforting thud. A curious fragment of folklore says that some households added herbs to the thatch to deter pests and bring good fortune. Whether this practice was widespread is uncertain, but today you see one of the women climbing up with a small bundle of dried juniper. She tucks it between two layers of thatch. The scent spreads gently across the space, sharp and clean, rising toward the rafters like invisible smoke. As the work continues, a quiet conversation begins below. A few builders discuss the pitch of the roof. One man argues that a steeper pitch helps snow slide quickly. Another counters that a slightly flatter roof holds snow in a thick, insulating layer that can help warm the home. This debate has echoed among researchers too, with theories based on the shapes of surviving ruins and comparisons to neighboring regions. There is no perfect answer. Only choices shaped by weather, tradition, and intuition. Today, the builders choose a gentle slope, trusting their knowledge of local storms. You watch as the thatch thickens overhead. The builders press each layer with long wooden paddles, ensuring it sits tight. They tie cords at intervals to keep the bundles from sliding during heavy snow. The cords creak softly as they tighten, making the roof feel more like a woven basket than a simple covering. You climb partway up one of the ladders, holding onto the sides as the cold wood presses into your palms. From this higher angle, the thatch looks like a golden river flowing across the longhouse. The stalks ripple in the breeze, catching the faint rays of sunlight. You step onto a crossbeam carefully, mindful of the height, and one of the builders steadies your arm. He laughs softly, as if amused by your mix of curiosity and caution. From here you can see the interior glow take shape. The light beneath the thatch turns warm and dappled, painting the inside of the house in shades of bronze. It reminds you of early morning sunlight filtered through trees. You imagine how comforting this will feel in the heart of winter, when days are short and nights seem endless. You climb down slowly, boots sliding slightly on the rungs. Back on the floor, you watch as the final bundles are lifted. The roof thickens layer by layer until it looks almost like the mane of some great northern beast, wild yet controlled. The builders fill the ridge at the top with a long spine of bundled straw, lashed tightly to keep out rain. When they smooth this final crest, the longhouse seems to settle, as if taking its first real breath. You walk outside to see the roof from the clearing. It blends almost perfectly with the landscape. The dried grasses shimmer in the cold air, their color matching the withered plants nearby. You understand now how homes like this could fold into the hillside and disappear from a distance, protected from storms both natural and human. One of the older builders steps beside you and comments quietly that a good thatched roof can last decades if maintained. He tells you that in storm seasons, when winds howl and snow piles high, he listens to the whispering sound of the roof as reassurance. Each soft creak means the straw holds firm. Each gentle rustle means warmth is staying inside. You picture him checking the roof late at night, lantern in hand, while icy darkness presses outside. A small group carries water to sprinkle lightly across the thatch. You ask why, and a woman explains that dampening the surface helps the layers settle and bind together. As she tosses water upward, droplets sparkle briefly before sinking into the straw. She smiles and says that once the roof dries again, it will harden slightly, becoming even more resistant to rain and snow. You walk along the edge of the longhouse, letting your hand glide across the thick mat of straw. It feels surprisingly firm, not fragile at all. You push it gently, and it springs back. The roof seems alive under your palm, breathing with the wind, whispering softly as you move. Inside, the thatched ceiling muffles the world. No more sharp wind, no more echoing cold. Instead, the air feels softer, held in place by the dense layers overhead. You listen closely and notice how footsteps feel quieter now, how voices sound more intimate. The thatch absorbs sound as deeply as it holds warmth. You settle beside the hearthstones and look up at the completed roof. A sense of safety drifts through you, subtle but strong. This ceiling will protect against storms. It will cradle the glow of firelight. It will shelter stories, dreams, quarrels, laughter, and sleep. You imagine snow falling on it, piling layer after layer until the world outside is buried in white silence. And inside, the longhouse will feel like a warm tunnel carved out of winter. As evening settles, the golden tones of the thatch darken to honey, then to amber, and finally to a soft brown shadow. You place your hand on the floor and feel the faint warmth still rising from the stones buried beneath. The longhouse has begun to feel whole, strong, private, alive. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the gentle rustling overhead, a sound like distant waves on a quiet shore. The roof is ready, and soon the home will be too. You step back into the longhouse just as the sun lifts over the horizon, its weak winter rays spilling across the clearing like pale gold. Inside, the space feels transformed. The thatched roof softens every sound. The double walls stand firm, and the faint scent of dried juniper lingers in the air. Today, the attention shifts to something quieter but equally vital. It is time to shape the tools that will finish this home, the tools that carve, smooth, bore, and bind every last piece of wood into place. You move toward a low workbench where an assortment of Viking tools rests in an organized scatter. Your eyes land first on the axes. They are not oversized or theatrical like the ones you might see in modern portrayals. These are working axes, compact, balanced, and sharp enough to split frozen timber with smooth precision. You lift one by the handle, feeling its surprising lightness. The wooden grip fits comfortably in your palm, shaped by repeated smoothing and years of familiarity. Its blade glints softly, reflecting a pale sliver of sunlight. It strikes you that many people vaguely familiar with Viking culture already know they were excellent metalworkers. But seeing these tools in person reminds you just how refined their craft truly was. The axe head curves in a gentle arc, designed not only for cutting but for shaving fine layers of wood. A carpenter beside you demonstrates, dragging the blade across a beam with long, controlled strokes. Thin curls of wood fall like feathers, each strip warm and fragrant despite the cold air. Next, you pick up an adze. At first glance, it looks odd, the blade set perpendicular to the handle, almost like a small hoe turned into a woodworking tool. The carpenter laughs softly at your hesitation and shows how the tool scoops wood cleanly from irregular surfaces. He raises it, brings it down with a steady chop, and lifts a satisfying curl of timber from the log. The sound echoes with a deep, mellow quality, like a drum beat softened by snow. You crouch lower to examine a series of augers lined neatly beside the bench. They resemble long, slender spirals of iron fixed to wooden handles. The carpenter hands you one and guides your fingers around the grip. These tools drill holes for joints and pegs, he explains, making the structure sturdier without relying solely on iron nails. You turn the handle slowly, feeling the weight of the auger and imagining how it bites into wood, twisting deeper with every rotation. A fascinating detail often discussed among artisans today is that Viking joinery relied heavily on wooden pegs and well-fitted joints rather than metal fasteners. Metal was precious after all. The fewer iron nails used, the better. You admire a freshly carved joint nearby, its edges smooth, its angles precise. You run your fingertips along the groove and feel the slight texture of the wood grain, a reminder of the tree it once was. Nearby, a woman sits cross-legged with a small knife in hand. She sharpens tool blades with slow, practiced movements, using a flat stone and a small cup of water. You watch as she draws the blade across the stone with quiet concentration. Each stroke whispers softly. She pauses occasionally to hold the blade up to the light, checking its edge. She tells you with a wry smile that a dull tool wastes wood and patience. As she works, she mentions a small detail passed down from her grandmother. Some carvers believed that whispering to their tools while sharpening them helped keep the edges obedient. Whether the belief carried any magical purpose, or was simply a way to focus the mind, you cannot tell. But as she murmurs a few soft words to her blade, you feel a strange sense of calm settle over the space. You stand and walk toward a group working on a large log that will become one of the final support beams. The men use broad axes to remove large chunks, shaping the log into a uniform surface. Their strokes are rhythmic and coordinated. Chips of wood fly through the air, spinning like tiny spirals before landing in a growing pile near your feet. The smell of fresh timber fills your nose, warm and vibrant. One of the older builders gestures for you to help hold the beam steady. You brace your hands against the cold wood, feeling its weight and density. He nods in gratitude and resumes slicing along the grain. You sense how deeply these people understand their tools, not only how to use them, but how they sound when they meet good wood or poor wood, how they feel when a joint fits perfectly or resists, how they carry the memory of every stroke. A lively discussion rises among the builders about tool metals. Some argue that hard, brittle iron makes the best cutting edges. Others prefer slightly softer iron that resists shattering in cold weather. This debate, echoed in archaeological discussions as well, reflects the delicate balance between sharpness and durability. You listen closely, feeling the charm of hearing these ancient craft arguments firsthand. As another beam takes shape, a young apprentice walks up proudly, holding a freshly carved wooden mallet. The handle is smooth, polished by careful sanding, and the head is thick and solid. He hands it to you. It feels perfectly weighted, easy to swing without strain. He grins, knowing he has balanced it well. Mallets like this drive pegs, adjust joints, and coax stubborn planks into place. You give it a testing tap against your palm. It makes a deep, satisfying thump. Tools scatter across the longhouse floor in purposeful disorder. Sharp knives for trimming moss into cracks, long saws for shaping boards, heavy wedges for splitting logs, delicate bone needles for sewing hides. You walk among them, each piece telling its own story through scratches, stains, or carefully wrapped handles. The longhouse feels alive with the rhythm of work. You step outside briefly to watch a pair of workers split a massive log into planks. They use iron wedges and wooden mallets, driving the wedges into the log with powerful blows. The wood cracks open with a resonant pop. Steam rises faintly from the fresh split, carrying a scent of resin and cold earth. You run your hand over the smooth interior surface, still warm from the friction of splitting. Back inside, the finishing touches continue. Tools shape everything from door frames to storage shelves. The rhythmic scrape of carving knives blends with the soft thuds of mallets. You begin to notice how each tool has its own voice, its own rhythm. You can almost close your eyes and understand the work simply by listening. A young woman hands you a small, unfinished bowl carved from birch. She invites you to feel its surface. Your fingertips glide across gentle curves, still slightly rough from the carving blade. She explains that bowls and utensils must be made now, before winter deepens. Tools do not just build homes, they build the objects that make life inside those homes possible. As the day draws to a close, the toolmakers begin cleaning their workspaces. Blades are wiped down and oiled. Handles are checked for cracks. Spindles, mallets, augers, chisels, and knives are organized with quiet reverence. You watch as they lay out their tools near the hearthstones, letting the gentle warmth keep moisture at bay. You remain seated for a moment longer, surrounded by the calm energy of finished tasks. Your hands rest on a block of timber, still carrying the scent of a living tree. You feel the slow beat of winter settling in the air, and the quiet peace of a place taking shape through skill and care. Tonight, the tools rest, and soon, the longhouse will be ready for its first breath of real warmth. You enter the longhouse at dawn, when the sky is still soft with the faintest pink of morning. A hush hangs over the clearing, the kind that arrives before voices, footsteps, and tools start their daily rhythm. Inside, you find the Vikings gathered around the hearth space, not yet lit, speaking quietly about the tasks ahead. Today is not a day of lone craftsmanship or silent carving. Today is a day when the entire clan must move together, a living machine built from many hands and many breaths. You step into the center of the longhouse and notice how people arrange themselves in natural groups. Some gather near the timber stacks, others cluster by the entrances, sharpening tools or adjusting clothing layers. A few children dart between adults, carrying small items, offering help where they can. The space pulses with a warm sense of shared purpose, even before the fire comes alive. You watch as the builders divide the work with an ease born from long practice. They do not bark orders or argue over tasks. Instead, they negotiate with quiet gestures, a nod here, a raised eyebrow there. Everyone seems to know where they belong. A widely accepted understanding among scholars who study early northern communities is that longhouse construction was always communal. No single family could finish such a project alone. It required neighbors, relatives, travelers, and sometimes entire villages to contribute their strength. You follow a group heading toward the exterior wall. They speak in low voices, discussing where to add diagonal braces for extra stability. You offer to hold a beam steady while they test its angle. One man pushes gently against the beam, another listens to the faint creak in the wood. A woman presses her palm against the joint and feels for movement. You stand still, sensing how their rhythm guides the moment. When the beam settles just right, they all nod in unison. As they begin pegging the brace into place, you hear the rhythmic tapping of mallets echo through the longhouse like a heartbeat. It is not hurried. It is steady, thoughtful, almost meditative. A young apprentice moves closer, handing pegs from a small clay jar. He beams with pride each time an adult accepts one. You find yourself smiling, warmed by the subtle ceremony of it all. Meanwhile, along the eastern wall, a group of women and older men prepare woven mats for insulation. They sit in a semicircle, their hands moving quickly through wool and reeds. The mats rustle softly as they work, and the sound blends with murmured conversations. One of the women tells you an old tale about a longhouse built so quickly by a village that they said the spirits could not keep up. According to the story, the spirits spent all winter wandering outside, confused about where the walls had sprung from. Whether this tale holds a grain of truth or grew from long winter nights of storytelling, it carries a gentle charm that makes you chuckle. You walk deeper into the longhouse, drawn by the rhythmic thudding of logs being shifted. A group of men are preparing heavy timbers for the final support arch near the main entrance. You join them as they circle around a massive log. On a soft signal, they lift in perfect coordination, moving like a single body. The log rises slowly, its weight shared evenly. Their voices blend into a single chant, a steady hum that grows louder as they position the log. You place your hands beneath the beam, helping guide it into its joint. Sweat gathers on foreheads despite the cold air, and you feel the tension give way as the log settles securely into place. A moment of pride flickers across their faces. This is how a home becomes strong, not with isolated effort, but with the energy of many bodies moving with one purpose. You sense the quiet satisfaction in the air. Over in the byre area, a mother and her teenage daughter spread fresh straw across the floor. The smell lifts through the air, sweet and dry. They smooth it with their boots, spreading it evenly. The daughter hums a soft tune, possibly something handed down from her grandmother. The sound is light, almost floating. You realize how much music and rhythm weave through their work. Even without instruments, their voices, footsteps, and tools blend into something that feels almost ceremonial. You step toward the doorway beam, where a new group is at work carving decorative notches. They are not grand designs, just small, careful cuts that mark family identity, local tradition, or blessings for the home. One elder runs his hand across a carved symbol and tells you it represents protection from storms. He adds that not all such marks come from superstition. Sometimes they simply remind people to keep working together, especially during hard seasons. You nod, feeling the weight of those words settle quietly in your chest. A cluster of children gathers near the hearth with tiny wooden bowls. They pretend to cook, using snow and twigs as ingredients. Their laughter rings brightly, chasing away the cold. Their play mirrors the real work happening around them, because even children here learn through imitation. One girl proudly shows you a small wooden spoon she has carved under her father's guidance. The edges are rough, but the shape is clear. You admire it sincerely, and her face lights up with pride. In the far corner, a few men debate the best way to reinforce the roof ridge before snow thickens. One suggests adding a secondary beam. Another proposes tightening the cords. Their voices remain calm, their discussion thoughtful. This kind of debate appears in historical studies as well. Some archaeological evidence suggests that variations in roof reinforcement reflect different regional traditions rather than one universal method. Listening to the discussion here, you can see how such differences emerge naturally. As you move between groups, you notice how seamlessly tasks flow from one person to another. When someone finishes tying a cord, another steps in to tuck in loose straw. When a beam needs holding, hands rise instantly. When water is needed, a child runs to fetch it. The longhouse is not only a structure, it is a choreography, an unspoken understanding. You find yourself blending into the rhythm, feeling guided by the collective movement around you. The sun dips lower, casting warm orange light through the wide doorway. Everyone gathers near the hearth for a shared moment of rest. They sit on stones, logs, or woven mats. Bread is passed around, along with small pouches of dried berries. Someone hands you a piece of barley bread still warm from a small oven outside. You bite into it and savor the dense, earthy flavor. As the group eats, quiet stories surface. A man describes building another longhouse years ago during a winter even colder than this one. A woman recalls how her father used to hum while carving beams, claiming the timber stayed straighter when it was sung to. A young apprentice boasts about how quickly he can shape pegs now, earning laughter and gentle teasing from the adults. The day winds down with the same steadiness with which it began. Tools are set aside, straw brushed from cloaks, hands warmed over the temporary fire. The longhouse stands taller, stronger, almost glowing in the evening light. You take one last look around and feel the quiet heartbeat of the community pulsing through the walls. This home is being shaped by dozens of hands, dozens of stories, dozens of breaths. And as the builders step outside to greet the twilight, you realize something simple and profound. Warmth is not built from timber alone. It is built from people moving together, trusting each other, and weaving their lives into the very structure they raise. You step into the longhouse at midday, when the air outside bites with a sharper cold and the sky hangs low, a muted grey bowl stretched above the clearing. Inside, the structure stands proudly, but something subtle still needs attention. You hear soft voices coming from the far wall, and when you follow them, you discover a group of Vikings crouched low, inspecting tiny slivers of daylight sneaking through the wooden planks. Even the smallest crack can become a frozen knife in winter, and today they are determined to stop every whisper of wind from slipping inside. You kneel beside them and press your fingers along the edge of the wall where two timbers meet. A thread of icy air brushes your skin. It is faint but unmistakable. You almost pull your hand back on instinct. The Vikings exchange knowing glances. They have felt this before, many winters over, and they come prepared. A basket sits nearby, filled with dark, sticky mud, scooped from the edge of a marsh. You reach into it carefully. The mud is cold and thick, clinging to your glove with surprising strength. A woman laughs softly at your startled expression. She explains that this mixture, sometimes called chinking mud, is one of their most dependable allies against winter drafts. Mud from marshy ground contains fibers, tiny roots, and minerals that bind it together. When packed into wall gaps, it hardens into a dense, durable seal. You watch her scoop a handful and press it firmly into the seam between two planks. The mud squishes slightly, then clings. She smooths the surface with the flat edge of a wooden paddle. Her motions are sure, almost graceful. When she steps back, the crack is gone, erased by a streak of earth that looks as though it has always belonged there. A well-known detail among experts studying old Norse buildings is that chinking materials varied widely. Some regions used peat mixed with hair or straw, others used turf scraps, and where marshes were plentiful, this heavy mud became the solution of choice. You inhale deeply, catching the mineral scent rising from the damp mixture. It smells of wet earth and cold mornings, a scent that feels strangely comforting as it blends with the smell of fresh timber. Children gather nearby, eager to help. They carry small scraps of moss in their hands. The adults smile and nod, guiding them to tuck moss into narrow crevices before covering them with mud. The moss acts like a cushion, expanding and contracting as moisture changes. You help a young boy press a line of moss along a thin seam. His fingers move with surprising confidence, and he beams when an older builder praises his work. As the builders move along the wall, a lively conversation grows. One man argues that adding hair from sheepskins into the mud makes it stronger. Another insists that mud alone works just fine. A woman chimes in, saying that her grandmother mixed crushed shells into the mud to keep insects away. You recognize the same kind of disagreement that appears in archaeological discussions today. Some researchers believe fibers were common in chinking, while others say pure mud was more typical. Listening here, you realize both approaches likely existed, shaped by local resources. You watch them continue sealing gaps with steady determination. Every small crack receives the same attention as larger ones. The mud goes in thick, smoothed down carefully, then left to dry. As it hardens, it will become dense enough to block the cold wind completely. You press your palm against a finished section. The surface feels cool and firm, even though the mud is still drying. You imagine how it will stiffen further after a few days, turning into a protective band that hugs the longhouse walls tightly. One builder dips her fingers into the mud and draws a faint line across the plank, testing its thickness. Then she glances at you and remarks that cracks are like sneaky wolves. If you ignore one, the pack will follow. The others chuckle, but the metaphor lingers in your mind. In this climate, even a small draught can threaten the warmth of an entire home. A group of men moves to the outer wall, working in practiced formation. One applies moss, another packs mud over it, a third smooths the surface. Their motions sync together like a quiet dance, each person moving the moment the previous step is done. You step outside to watch from the clearing, and you see how the longhouse exterior slowly transforms. Dark streaks of mud fill every seam, blending perfectly with the sod tucked between timber beams. Cold air brushes your face again, sharper than before. You draw your cloak tighter and feel newfound respect for the work happening around you. Without this chinking, all the clever insulation, thick walls, and warm floors would struggle to hold heat. A home can be mighty in structure, but even mighty walls have tiny weaknesses. Today, those weaknesses are disappearing one by one beneath practiced hands. A woman approaches with a small bucket of water and wets the wooden paddle she uses for smoothing. The water helps spread the mud evenly, creating a snug seal. She hands you the paddle and invites you to try. You press it gently against the mud, dragging it upward in a slow motion. The mud spreads cleanly, filling the seam without crumbling. She nods approvingly, patting your shoulder as if you have passed some small but meaningful test. You continue smoothing for a while, your movements becoming steadier. The repetition feels grounding. With each stroke, you imagine the bitter wind outside losing one more opportunity to slip inside. You sense the longhouse becoming stronger, more enclosed, more ready for winter. Suddenly, a shout from across the room draws your attention. A young builder holds up a strange, curved piece of wood, proudly explaining how he wedged it into a particularly troublesome crack. The others laugh and cheer him on. He bows dramatically, accepting their praise. These small moments of humor punctuate the work like sparks in cold air, warming spirits even when hands grow numb. As afternoon deepens, the walls glisten with patches of drying mud. The longhouse feels more sheltered, quieter, embraced by its own growing solidity. You walk along the walls, sliding your palm over the smooth sections. Each seam sealed feels like a step closer to safety. Someone lights a small test fire in the hearth pit. The smoke rises through the vent. Warm air begins to drift outward with a soft breath. You stand near a freshly sealed wall and notice something remarkable. No cold draft brushes your hand now, only the stirring warmth from the hearth. A sense of accomplishment settles over the entire group. They gather near the center, wiping mud from their hands and boots, laughing quietly as the first true heat begins to melt the chill in the room. You take a slow breath and realize that this simple task, packing mud between planks, carries profound consequence. It is a promise of warmth, comfort, and survival. It is the quiet labor that makes the difference between shivering through winter nights and resting peacefully behind walls that stand firm. And as you listen to the gentle crackling of the fire, you understand. Sometimes it is the smallest things, pressed carefully into place, that keep the coldest nights at bay. You return to the longhouse just as the afternoon settles into a soft, cold stillness. The wind outside carries the sharp scent of snow, and the sky hangs low, a pale grey blanket pressing against the treetops. Inside, the warmth from the test fire lingers faintly, curling around the beams like a promise. Today, the Vikings turn their attention to a part of the home that rarely draws admiration but quietly decides whether families will eat well through winter: the storage rooms. These small chambers sit near the back of the living space, close enough to benefit from household heat but far enough from the hearth to stay cool and dry. You follow a group of women and older men into one such room. It looks simple at first glance, nothing more than a narrow alcove framed with timber. But the moment you step inside, you feel a shift in the air. It is cooler here, noticeably so. The walls, carefully packed with turf and mud, hold the temperature steady. It almost feels like stepping into a natural refrigerator. One of the women lifts a woven basket filled with dried fish. The aroma drifts toward you, salty and slightly smoky. She places the basket on a raised wooden shelf, explaining that storage rooms cannot be too warm. Otherwise, dried goods would soften or spoil. A detail widely recognized in studies of northern settlements is that Viking storage spaces often balanced warmth from the living area with the natural cold seeping from the surrounding earth. This balance helped keep food in a state that was neither frozen solid nor vulnerable to rot. You run your fingers along one of the shelves. It is smooth, polished by knives and hands over many seasons. The wood feels surprisingly warm compared to the air. Perhaps it has absorbed the heat from earlier cooking fires or from the bodies passing nearby. The shelf sits high enough to avoid ground moisture. Beneath it lies a layer of pebbles and hardened earth, designed to wick away dampness. You crouch down and touch the pebbles. They shift softly under your fingers, cool but dry. A group of builders enters carrying a small chest crafted from stout planks. The lid opens with a satisfying creak, and you glimpse its contents: bags of barley, small bundles of herbs, and tightly wrapped pouches of dried berries. One man tells you proudly that his wife dried the berries in late summer, preserving their sweetness for deep winter. His voice carries a quiet affection as he sets the chest in the corner. Someone else brings in a slab of cheese wrapped in cloth. It smells sharp, earthy, and slightly sour. The woman placing it on the shelf explains that cheese continues to age during winter, and the cool, steady air helps the flavor deepen. She pats the bundle gently, almost as though the cheese were a sleeping child. As you move through the storage room, you notice a curious detail. Small holes near the roofline allow a subtle airflow, not enough to let in cold drafts, but just enough to prevent moisture from settling. A thoughtful design choice, and one that appears in excavated sites as well. Some researchers believe these ventilation gaps served multiple purposes, from controlling humidity to allowing smoke to drift lightly into the storage area during certain seasons. Smoke acted as a natural preservative, keeping insects at bay. One man climbs onto a stool and checks the airflow with the back of his hand. He nods with a satisfied hum. A few others debate the size of the ventilation holes. One insists that a larger gap would keep the air fresher. Another argues that too much air invites frost. Their exchange mirrors an ongoing question among experts. How much ventilation did Viking storage rooms truly need? You watch quietly, fascinated by how ancient debates echo into modern scholarship. Children wander in with armfuls of dried herbs. They carry sprigs of thyme, bundles of nettle, and clusters of dried angelica. The sharp scent rises instantly, filling the room with an herbal freshness. You take a small branch of dried thyme and rub it between your fingers. The aroma releases gently. One of the girls explains that herbs help deter pests and add flavor to stews when the fresh greens of summer are long gone. A boy hurries past carrying small clay jars. He sets them neatly on another shelf. A woman opens one jar and reveals precious salt. She dips her fingertip inside and sprinkles a tiny pinch onto the ground as a symbolic blessing. She smiles and tells you about a belief her mother taught her. Food kept with care brings harmony to a home. Whether this belief holds truth or simply tradition, the way she handles the jar reveals deep reverence. In another corner, a man digs a shallow pit lined with stones. He explains this spot will hold tubers, especially turnips and carrots, which last longer when stored in cool, dark pockets. You kneel beside him, watching as he spreads a thin layer of sand across the stones. The sand feels dry and cold beneath your fingertips. He places a few turnips in the pit and covers them gently with more sand. The method reminds you of ancient stories about root cellars, except here It is woven directly into the longhouse itself. A small clay oil lamp flickers on a stone ledge. The flame is steady, its glow soft and golden. It illuminates the rows of food, tools, and herbs, casting warm highlights across everything stored here. The storage room feels alive, not with people, but with the quiet hum of preparation. Every shelf, basket, and jar is a promise that winter will not catch this family unprepared. You stand slowly, feeling the cool air settle around your shoulders. For a moment, you imagine the longhouse deep in winter, snow piling against the walls, wind moaning outside, and inside this small chamber, shelves lined with months of care, fresh bread dipped into warm stews, cheese carved with care, children stealing dried berries from a wooden chest, the quiet comfort of knowing there is enough. A voice calls softly from the doorway. More baskets arrive, filled with smoked lamb and dried mushrooms. The scent fills the space, rich and earthy, curling through the cool air. People begin sorting, placing heavier goods on lower shelves, lighter ones higher. The organization feels intentional, almost strategic. Everything has its place. You help arrange another shelf of herbs, careful not to crush the brittle leaves. A woman nods approvingly, as if recognizing your care. The room takes shape around you, becoming more than a storage area. It becomes a hidden heart of the home, a quiet guardian that nurtures the entire family. You step back into the main hall and feel a wave of warmth return to your skin. The storage room remains behind you, cool and calm. It is ready. Winter can come. This home will feed its people well. You return to the longhouse as dusk settles gently over the clearing, turning the sky a muted lavender. The structure feels warmer now, more enclosed, more secure. The walls hold firm, the roof shelters quietly, and the storage room rests behind you like a heartbeat. Yet as you walk deeper inside, you notice the builders gathering near the longhouse walls with bundles of wood and woven blankets. Today, they are preparing the places where families will sleep. And in a winter this harsh, where the night devours daylight quickly, these sleeping nooks will become small islands of safety and warmth. You watch as a woman runs her palm along a raised wooden platform that stretches along one side of the hall. The platform stands several hands above the floor, the height chosen intentionally. A detail widely recognized in studies of northern homes is that raised beds protected sleepers from the cold that lingered near the ground. Cold air sinks, after all. Up here, even a few inches make a difference. You kneel beside the platform, touching the smooth wooden surface. It feels cool now, but you can imagine how quickly it will warm once layered with blankets and furs. The woman beside you gestures for help, and together you lift a heavy pelt onto the wood. The fur spills across the surface, soft and thick, spreading warmth with surprising speed. You run your fingers through it, feeling the dense undercoat that once protected an animal through winters just as harsh as this one. Children gather nearby, curious and excited. One of them brings woven blankets made of coarse wool. The blankets smell faintly of lanolin and smoke, a comforting scent that settles into the air. You help drape one across the platform, smoothing the edges with your hands. The fabric is heavy, the weave tight, designed to trap warmth even on the coldest nights. A man approaches carrying a wooden beam. He places it at the edge of the platform and begins fastening it with wooden pegs. You watch his deliberate motions. He is building a low barrier, just tall enough to keep blankets, furs, and sleeping children from slipping onto the floor at night. As he taps the final peg into place, he steps back and smiles, offering you a chance to test it. You gently press against the beam, feeling its solid resistance. You turn back to the platform and notice something sliding beneath it, a shallow storage crate. The woman reveals that sleeping platforms often doubled as storage spaces for clothing, tools, or emergency food. She slides the crate back into place, and you admire the practicality. Here, nothing is wasted. Every inch of the home has a purpose. A faint conversation rises near the far corner. A few elders debate whether curtains should hang around the sleeping areas. One argues that cloth curtains trap warmth and create pockets of cozy air. Another counters that too much enclosure limits airflow and might make the room stuffy when the hearth burns strongly. Their exchange mirrors discussions among modern scholars who study settlement design. Did Viking sleeping nooks always have curtains, or did only some households use them? No single answer exists. You watch as the women decide to compromise. They hang partial curtains, thick wool panels attached to wooden rods, but only on the outer edge of the platform. You help lift one curtain into place. It falls with a soft thud, creating a shaded cocoon. When you step inside the nook, the curtain muffles the outside sound slightly, adding a sense of privacy. You sit on the platform for a moment, letting the atmosphere surround you, the scent of wool, the softness of fur, the muted glow of late afternoon light filtering through the curtain. You imagine lying here in the deepest part of winter, listening to a storm batter the roof. You picture the quiet crackle of the hearth in the distance, the steady warmth rising from the stone-heated floor, the soft breathing of others nearby. You can almost feel yourself drifting towards sleep. A young apprentice adjusts a wooden frame near another platform. He tells you proudly that he has carved small notches along the top beam to hold oil lamps. His mother plans to place a lamp there each night, its faint glow casting warm shadows across the curtains. You imagine the flickering light dancing across the room, turning the sleeping spaces into gentle amber alcoves that soothe weary eyes. Next, a small boy brings a handful of dried herbs tied in neat bundles. He places them beneath the edge of the platform. You ask why, and his grandmother answers with a smile. The herbs deter pests and add a pleasant scent to the bedding. She names thyme, yarrow, and angelica, plants she gathered in late summer when the sun still warmed the earth. You breathe in the faint herbal perfume rising from the dried leaves. It fills the nook with a freshness that surprises you. A woman kneels beside you with a thin, animal hide sheet. She spreads it across the center of the platform. The hide feels smooth and slightly cool. She explains that it creates an extra layer of insulation, preventing cold from creeping up through the wood during extremely frigid nights. You help smooth out the edges. The hide softens under your palms as it warms. Across the hall, another family arranges their sleeping space. One man carefully folds woolen garments to use as pillows. A few children test the softness by laying their heads on them and giggling. Their laughter floats through the longhouse, warming the air more than the fire ever could. In the corner near the entrance, a couple debates whether to stack extra firewood near their sleeping nook. The man insists the warmth from the woodpile will help. His partner teases him, saying he is just too lazy to carry wood from outside during storms. Their playful exchange brings quiet smiles from those nearby. You realize how these tiny domestic conversations have probably echoed through longhouses for centuries. As the light fades, the workers hang one final curtain. The wool panel shifts gently, its folds catching the soft glow of an oil lamp nearby. The longhouse begins to feel less like a construction site and more like a home, a safe place, a place where warmth gathers, not only from fire and walls, but from shared effort, shared stories, shared breath. You step back to admire the transformed sleeping nooks, the raised platforms, the layered furs, the tucked herbs, the half-drawn curtains. You imagine the first night the families will sleep here, curled beneath heavy blankets, their hearts finally resting after months of preparation. A woman invites you to sit beside her on the platform. You lower yourself gently, letting the softness cradle your weight. She tells you that sleeping spaces are sacred in their own quiet way. They hold dreams, memories, and the deepest rest. They protect the spirit as much as the body. You look around the longhouse once more, feeling its enveloping calm. The spaces are ready. Warmth will gather here soon, night after night, winter after winter. And as you stand to leave the sleeping nook, brushing wool fibers from your cloak, you carry with you the gentle knowledge that a home's warmth often begins in the place where people lay their heads. You step outside for a moment, letting the cold air clear your lungs before returning to the longhouse. Evening light spills across the clearing, soft and pale, the kind that makes shadows stretch long and thin. When you step back inside, you notice a group of Vikings gathered near the main entrance. They are examining the doorway with the same seriousness they gave to walls, roof, and hearth. You move closer, curious. Today, they are building something essential yet often overlooked, the layered entrance that will protect the longhouse from the icy wind. You step beside them and feel the draft slide past your cheek. It is just a whisper now, slipping through the open doorway, but on a night filled with winter storms, this same gap could become a bitter gale. The Vikings know this well. A simple door will not suffice. The entrance must act like a barrier, a buffer, a shield that slows the cold before it reaches the heart of the home. One man holds up a thick wooden frame, carefully shaped to slot into place. You run your palm along its edge. The wood is dense and smooth, still fragrant with sap. He explains that this will become the storm door, a heavy outer layer meant to break the force of incoming wind. A detail commonly noted by those who study early northern architecture is that many longhouses featured double entrances, an outer door to blunt the cold and an inner door to preserve the warmth. This design turns the doorway into a small chamber, trapping cold air before it rushes into the main hall. As the builders lift the frame into position, their movements are deliberate. They fit it snugly against the outer wall, testing for gaps with careful hands. You watch as a woman kneels to inspect the threshold. She runs her fingers along the bottom edge and frowns at a thin draft. Moments later, she stuffs tufts of moss into the space, pressing each piece firmly. The moss expands slightly, sealing the gap with the quiet diligence of living matter. She glances at you and nods, pleased. A boy brings a plank that will serve as the door itself. It is thick, reinforced with diagonal braces, and heavy enough to feel like a solid promise. You help lift it, surprised at the weight. The builders attach sturdy wooden hinges made from carved pegs and fitted sockets. They test the door several times, opening and closing it with slow swings. The sound is deep and reassuring, wood meeting wood with quiet authority. Another group begins shaping the inner doorway. Unlike the storm door, this one is lighter, easier to open, and positioned a short distance inside. Together, the two create a small vestibule. You step into the space between them, imagining how it will feel during winter. Cold air will enter through the outer door, hover briefly in this small chamber, then lose momentum before it can pass through the inner barrier. You press your hand against the side wall and feel the thickness of the turf behind it. Even here, the longhouse is designed to hold warmth close. A lively discussion rises among the builders about whether to hang a hide curtain behind the inner door. One man insists the curtain adds another layer of insulation. Another argues that heavy hides make it awkward to move in and out quickly. A woman suggests splitting the hide into two panels so it parts easily when people pass through. This debate, you realize, echoes similar uncertainties in archaeological interpretations. Excavated longhouses sometimes show signs of doorway coverings, sometimes not. The truth likely varied from household to household. Eventually, they decide to add a divided hide curtain. You help hold one of the hides while the woman attaches it to a wooden rod. The hide feels warm and supple under your fingertips, its soft fur pleasant even in the cold room. When the curtain is finally hung, it sways slightly in the breeze from the doorway. You step through it and feel how gently it brushes your shoulders. The air behind it instantly feels warmer. A man steps inside carrying a bundle of dried reeds. He explains that some homes placed reed mats on the floor of the entry chamber to absorb melting snow from boots and cloaks. You watch as he unrolls the mat. Its surface rustles quietly, releasing a faint scent of riverbanks and summer heat. The mat settles across the ground like a humble welcome. Next, a pair of young builders bring in a narrow wooden bench. They place it near the inner door. You ask why, and one of them explains with a grin. It is for removing snow caked onto boots or shaking ice from cloaks before stepping further inside. In this climate, a small bench near the entrance is more than furniture. It is a tool for survival. As the work continues, the Vikings add a small shelf along the wall. On it, they place a handful of stones warmed by the hearth. These stones radiate a gentle heat, helping dry wet gloves or soften frozen leather. You lift one of the stones with care. Even through your glove, you can feel the warmth pulsing softly. A curious bit of local tradition surfaces when a grandmother arrives with a small pouch of salt. She sprinkles a fine trail across the threshold, muttering a blessing for protection. She explains that salt keeps misfortune from crossing the doorway. Whether this ritual began as superstition or practicality, you cannot say, but the act feels comforting, grounding, steady. As evening deepens, the outer door is tested again. It closes with a satisfying thud. Cold wind brushes against it from outside, but none of that chill reaches you. The vestibule stands firm, a silent guardian. You sit on the entry bench for a moment, watching the fire glow in the main hall. From here, the longhouse feels distant, almost dreamy, warm light flickering between shadows. You realize how important this small space is. Without the layered entrance, every time someone opened the door, winter would spill inside like a silent enemy. But now, the longhouse has armor. A child runs past you, laughing as he pushes through the hide curtain. The movement stirs a soft wave of warm air. You follow him into the main room and glance back at the completed entrance. It feels strong, thoughtful, alive with purpose. You take a slow breath, letting the air settle in your chest. The longhouse is nearly ready for the deepest cold. With each new layer, new seal, new structure, you feel winter's intimidation shrink. And as the outer wind rises with a distant howl, the longhouse remains calm. Inside, warmth gathers. Inside, the door holds firm. You step into the longhouse just as the first faint glow of evening settles over the clearing. Shadows stretch softly across the earthen floor, and the stillness carries a quiet expectation. Today, the builders gather near the hearth and around the walls, their hands filled with small clay lamps, carved holders, and containers of precious oil. Light is as important as heat in a home meant to survive long northern nights. Without the right glow, winter becomes a world of darkness broken only by fire, and the Vikings understood better than most how to coax soft light from simple materials. You watch as a woman kneels near the hearthstones, arranging tiny lamps along the floor. They are shaped from clay, each one with a small bowl and a narrow spout where a wick rests. She fills one lamp with oil, tilting the jug with practiced grace. A thin ribbon of shimmering liquid pours in. You lean closer and catch the scent. It is slightly sweet, slightly smoky, the fragrance of melted animal fat rendered in long-ago fires. A commonly known detail among those who study early northern living is that Vikings relied on oil lamps made from tallow or fish oil. The light they produced was gentle, steady, and long-lasting. Not bright enough to illuminate every corner, but perfect for guiding hands through evening tasks or casting a warm glow across sleeping nooks. A young girl brings a bundle of wicks woven from plant fibers and sheep wool. She hands you one, and you feel its soft texture between your fingers. When she places a wick into a lamp bowl and lights it with a glowing ember from the hearth, the flame rises slowly. The light is warm, golden, and just the right softness for a home built for rest and story. You watch the flame dance gently, unaffected by drafts, thanks to the newly sealed walls and careful design of the smoke vent. Another group begins hanging small lamps from wooden pegs along the inner wall. You help one man lift a lamp into place. When he lets go, the lamp sways lightly, sending flickers of gold across the wooden surface. The shadows ripple and soften. He steps back and nods in satisfaction. On a low bench near the far wall, a few elders discuss how much oil to store for the winter months. One insists on filling every jar to its brim, Another argues that too much oil in storage risks spoiling if the room grows too warm. Their debate mirrors the questions modern researchers still ask when studying ancient storage finds. Some households may have kept large quantities of tallow and fish oil, while others rationed closely. A woman rises from the group and brings a small jar toward you. She removes the lid and lets you smell the contents. The aroma is strong, salty, and unmistakably fish-based. She smiles knowingly and says that not all lamps smell pleasant, but when darkness lasts more than half the day, you learn to welcome even the smoky scent of a fish oil flame. You nod, understanding that winter comfort does not always come in perfect forms. Nearby, two men carve wooden candle stands. Though candles were not as common as oil lamps in early northern homes, certain regions used beeswax sparingly for important nights. You take in the sweet, rich scent of beeswax melting slowly near the hearth. It mixes with the sharper aroma of fish oil and the earthy smell of juniper tucked between the rafters. The longhouse feels like a tapestry of scents. A young apprentice demonstrates how he adjusts the wick height by pulling it slightly upward with a hooked stick. The flame brightens for a moment, then softens again. He explains proudly that controlling the wick helps control how quickly the oil burns. You watch his hands move with precision, his brow furrowing in concentration. In a world lit mostly by fire, managing a flame is a form of quiet craftsmanship. One mother gathers her children near the sleeping nooks and begins placing lamps close to where they will rest. She positions them low, far from any hanging fabric, taking care to keep the flames steady and safe. She explains that the lamps offer comfort during storms, when the wind outside howls like restless spirits. One of the boys presses his cheek against her arm and asks whether the lamps will stay lit all night. She smiles gently and says they will burn as long as needed. A curious detail mentioned occasionally in sagas and oral traditions describes how families sometimes carved protective symbols near lampstands. The belief was that steady light kept misfortune from creeping into dreams. Whether symbolic or practical, the shape of these symbols appears in some preserved timbers. You notice one elder carving such a mark with a small knife. He tells you it is a blessing for quiet nights. You take a lamp in your hands and walk toward the far end of the hall. The delicate flame quivers slightly as you move, but remains steady thanks to the roof vent guiding drafts upward. You place the lamp on a small alcove shelf and watch how the light pools across the floor. It touches the woven mats, the edges of blankets, and the curves of carved beams. It softens the shadows, turning the longhouse into a warm cocoon. Soon the builders begin arranging reflective stones behind a few lamps. They choose smooth, pale stones that catch the glow and bounce it outward. You crouch beside one such arrangement and notice how even a small stone amplifies the light without adding smoke or heat. One of the women pats the stone and explains that good placement can brighten a whole wall with only a single flame. Nearby, a child dips her fingers into a jar of soot mixed with ash. She spreads it lightly across the underside of a lamp bowl to prevent dripping oil from sticking. The mixture darkens her fingers, and she grins proudly at her work. You smile as her mother wipes her hands with a cloth and pats her hair gently. As lamps continue finding their places around the room, the longhouse glows with overlapping circles of amber light. The roof beams absorb some of the brightness, turning a deep honey color. The turf packed between beams softens the light further, muting harsh angles. The longhouse feels peaceful, almost dreamlike. You sit near the hearth and watch the lamps flicker. The fire crackles softly, sending waves of warm air upward. Above it, the smoke vent guides the rising haze gently outside, allowing the lamps to burn with a clean, steady flame. The light dances across the tools near the wall, gleaming faintly on blades and handles. A group gathers near the center and begins discussing how many lamps to keep lit through the longest winter nights. One woman argues that a single lamp near each sleeping nook is enough. Another insists that the hearth alone can carry the night. A man counters that small lamps help guide anyone who wakes in the darkness. Their quiet debate reflects something familiar in every era: Light is both comfort and necessity, a balance between using what you have and saving what you must. The children gather around the hearth and watch the play of light along the ceiling. One boy points out how the flames create patterns along the reed mats and rafters. You tilt your head upward and notice it too. The flickering light reveals the gentle curves of the beams, the texture of the roof thatch, the faint shadows where the walls meet the floor. Everywhere you look, the longhouse seems to breathe. As night deepens outside, the lamps glow brighter by comparison. The longhouse becomes a small universe of amber and gold. The cold wind outside seems distant now, muffled by thick walls and warm light. You inhale deeply, filling your chest with air that tastes faintly of tallow and wood smoke. This light is not harsh. It does not chase the night away. It softens it. It invites sleep, conversation, weaving, carving, and late-night stories. You stand slowly, feeling the warmth pocketed in the air. You know that when winter arrives in full force, these small flames will be just as important as the hearth. They will guide hands in the dark, comfort restless children, and keep the longhouse glowing like a lantern in the frozen world. And tonight, as the lamps flicker gently, you feel the home settling into itself, ready for the long nights to come. You wake to a muted world, the early light filtered through thick clouds that promise snow by evening. When you step into the longhouse, the warmth greets you like an old friend. Lamps still smolder from the night before, and a few embers glow faintly in the hearth. But what draws your attention today is the presence of neighboring families gathering just outside the doorway. Their voices drift through the entrance like soft currents, carrying familiarity, laughter, and the gentle rustle of cloaks. The Vikings understood something deeply practical. No home faces winter alone. Closeness between households is more than companionship. It is a buffer against the cold. You step outside and feel the brushing chill of the morning breeze. Around the clearing, several smaller structures stand close to the main longhouse. You had noticed them before, but only now do you understand the importance of their arrangement. The homes are placed close enough that warm air radiates between them, creating pockets where the wind loses its sharp edge. A commonly noted observation in archaeological maps of early northern settlements is that houses tended to cluster in tight groups, forming small communities where heat, resources, and labor flowed easily between families. As you walk among the gathered people, a woman points to the gap between two longhouses. The space is narrow, sheltered from wind by overlapping roof lines. She tells you that snow tends to settle softly here, rather than blowing freely. This creates a natural windbreak that protects the homes on the coldest nights. You run your hand along a wall and feel how the air is calmer, as though the longhouses breathe warmth into the shared space between them. A group of men set down baskets filled with straw and driftwood beside the entrance. One of them mentions that every household in the cluster shares material contributions. Today, this family helps finish the final insulation. Tomorrow, another household may lend fish oil or carved pegs. The rhythm of exchange feels effortless, woven through the community like a quiet agreement. You help carry one of the baskets inside, the weight scratching against your palms and releasing a faint, grassy scent. Inside, the longhouse fills with visitors who gladly join the work. A young man from a neighboring home kneels beside the hearth, checking the stones and murmuring approval at the way they have settled. Another visitor climbs onto the sleeping platform and examines the hide curtains, noting how well they trap warmth. You sense how these small inspections come from skill and affection. Everyone here has built homes of their own. They know what to look for. They know what keeps cold at bay. Near the entrance, two elderly women exchange stories about past winters. One recalls the cold season when people slept in shifts, taking turns, tending the hearth at night. The other describes a winter storm so fierce it buried an entire fence under snow as tall as a grown man. Their voices rise and fall with a kind of soft reverence. These stories shape how settlements build and survive. A lively discussion begins near the byre. A few neighbors debate how many animals to keep inside during the harshest nights. One insists that cattle alone can raise the indoor temperature noticeably. Another claims goats offer more warmth because they move constantly. Their conversation reflects a wider point often referenced by researchers. Animal heat was a valuable resource, and communities coordinated how much livestock each home could hold without overwhelming the space. You lean against a beam and listen, amused by their friendly rivalry. The children gather near the doorway to greet friends from other homes. They run outside together, boots crunching across frost-hardened ground. Their laughter rings brightly, lifting the mood even as the air grows colder. You watch them play in the narrow spaces between houses, where the wind softens and shadows fall gently. These protected pockets of warmth become their winter playgrounds. Later, as you walk with a group toward the edge of the settlement, someone points out the slight curve of the homes along the hillside. At first it seems accidental, but you soon notice the logic. The homes form a loose arc, each one facing roughly the same direction, their backs braced against the prevailing wind. This formation lets them shelter one another, breaking the force of gusts that sweep in from the sea. A thoughtful detail noted by several historians is that settlements often conform to natural windbreaks, enhancing the landscape's protection with human ingenuity. You brush your fingers along a sod wall and feel how the thick turf has already frozen slightly in the outer layer, while the inner layer remains warmer. A neighbor explains that clustered homes help stabilize temperatures. Heat radiates outward, even faintly, and when several homes share proximity, the ground between them freezes more slowly. Snow gathers more evenly and acts as natural insulation. You crouch to feel it. The snow is cold, but not the biting cold of exposed fields. As the sun climbs higher, the settlers begin preparing a shared task. Several families gather wood for winter repairs. You join them as they move in an organized line from the storage pile to each home. The work becomes a rhythm of footsteps, passing hands, and muffled thuds. Community labor like this ensures every house remains strong enough to endure storms. Even scholars examining ancient woodpiles note the hints of shared gathering and collective maintenance. One woman carries a pot of warm broth to share among the workers. Steam rises from the surface, carrying the scent of root vegetables and herbs. You wrap your hands around the wooden bowl she offers. The warmth seeps into your fingers, spreading through your chest. You sip slowly, listening to the mingling of voices. Stories blend with laughter. Advice flows freely. Children race back inside for blankets. A dog curls near the doorway, its fur thick, eyes half closed in comfort. You look at the longhouse again from outside. Surrounded by other homes, it seems to nestle into the village like a child wrapped in a fur cloak. No wind rushes at it directly, no cold slips unnoticed. Every family, every house, reinforces the others. This is warmth built through community, not just architecture. You follow a group back inside the longhouse. The interior glows with soft light from oil lamps. The air holds a comfortable warmth, the kind that comes not only from fire and heated stones, but from bodies moving, talking, breathing together. You realize then that even in deep winter, the heart of warmth is not a hearth or a wall or a fur blanket. It is the presence of others. A young girl climbs onto her mother's lap near the hearth, resting her cheek against a wool cloak. A neighbor places another log on the fire. Someone adjusts a lamp. Another hums a quiet tune. These small gestures weave a warm fabric around the home. You settle beside the fire and watch the golden light flicker against the double walls. Outside, the settlement forms a shield around the longhouse. Inside, the people form a shield around one another. And as the glow spreads softly across the room, you understand, warmth shared is warmth multiplied. You step into the longhouse earlier than usual, the air still heavy with the faint scent of smoke from last night's fire. A cold hush settles outside, the kind of stillness that precedes a heavy snowfall. Inside, though, a gentle bustle unfolds around the central hearth. Today, the builders gather with woven baskets, wooden rods, piles of kindling, and a stack of carefully dried logs. Their voices are low and steady, as though they already know that whatever happens next will shape the warmth of the entire winter, because now comes the heart of everything, teaching the home how to breathe. You move closer to the hearth pit, its stones arranged in a neat circle. Some of the stones still hold yesterday's warmth. You rest your hand on one. It feels faintly alive, storing heat like a quiet memory. The Vikings gather around the pit with an almost ceremonial air. One woman kneels and begins rearranging the stones, lifting some, adjusting others. She explains that the stones must sit at angles that encourage air to flow beneath the firewood. Without that flow, smoke will choke the room. A well-known concept among those who study Old Norse households is that hearths were engineered with surprising precision. Their placement at the center of the longhouse allowed heat to radiate evenly. Their shape encouraged air to move upward, guiding smoke toward the vent above. You glance at the vent now. It looks deceptively simple, just a narrow opening, but you can feel the slight draw of air rising through it like an invisible ladder. A man approaches with a handful of birch bark. He shows you how the thin bark curls easily, how its oils ignite quickly even in damp conditions. He places it gently in the center of the hearth. You touch one piece, feeling the papery surface. Its scent reminds you of forest walks under cold skies. Birch bark, he tells you with a quiet grin, is the friend you always want when winter tries to test you. Next, a young girl brings over small sticks of kindling. She arranges them carefully, leaning them into a tiny structure that looks almost playful. She glances at you shyly, then proudly explains that her father taught her this pattern to help fires catch faster. You smile at her precision. Her hands tremble slightly in the chill, but her movements remain steady. When the kindling is set, the builders add thicker pieces of dried wood. These logs carry the faint scent of pine and resin. You help lift one, its weight surprising you with its density. It rests across the smaller sticks, forming the foundation for the first serious flame. A man steps back and nods. Everything is ready. Before lighting the fire, the group pauses. You sense something unspoken passing among them. Hearth fires mark beginnings. The start of warmth. The start of family life inside the new home. The start of stories unfolding through long dark nights. Some believe that lighting a fire for the first time invites good fortune. Others simply see it as tradition. Either way, the moment feels almost sacred. A woman steps forward holding a glowing ember in a clay bowl. She bends low, transferring the ember onto the birch bark. You hold your breath as a thin thread of smoke curls upward. Then the bark catches, glowing bright orange. The kindling follows. Flames grow slowly, stretching like waking limbs. The hearth comes alive. Warmth begins to drift outward in quiet waves. You feel it touch your fingertips first, then your cheeks, then the center of your chest. It is gentle but sure, like a familiar hand placed softly on your shoulder. As the fire settles into its rhythm, smoke rises in a thin, gracious ribbon. You lift your gaze toward the roof vent and see the smoke slipping upward with a steady confidence. Air from the doorway moves across the room in a soft current, feeding the flame. The longhouse breathes for the first time. Someone closes the outer door, then the inner one. You feel the pressure in the room change ever so slightly. The air becomes calmer, warmer. The smoke no longer creeps where it should not. It rises cleanly, drawn by the vent like water pulled by gravity. This balance of air, heat, and movement is not accidental, nor is it fully understood even today. Some researchers suggest that the shape of Viking roofs created natural drafts. Others believe subtle gaps in the walls helped guide air. Debate continues, because no two reconstructed homes behave exactly alike. You watch children creep closer to the hearth, faces lit by flickering gold. They hold out their hands, giggling when the warmth brushes their palms. A mother gathers them back gently, reminding them to keep a respectful distance. The heat, though comforting, is still a force to be handled with care. A man sets a large stone near the edge of the fire. He explains that heating stones like these helps keep the longhouse warm through the night. The stone absorbs heat slowly and releases it long after the fire burns low. You help position another stone across from him. Its surface is cold now, but soon it will hold warmth like a secret. In the corner, an older woman begins boiling water in a bronze pot. Steam rises, carrying a deep herbal aroma. She tosses dried leaves into the pot, and the scent fills the longhouse. She explains that warm drinks keep spirits strong on long winter nights. You smile as she hands you a wooden cup. The warmth seeps through the vessel and into your hands. The fire crackles gently. Sparks pop softly. Shadows slide across the walls like living brushstrokes. You sit on a low bench beside the hearth and watch the flames. The longhouse feels different now, truly alive. Heat settles into the walls, into the floor, into the beams overhead. The double walls trap the warmth. The roof thatch softens it. The stone floor radiates it. You realize that everything built so far has been leading to this moment. A child asks why the vent must always stay open. One of the builders kneels and explains that fire needs to breathe just like people do. If the vent closes, smoke fills the home. If it opens too much, cold rushes in. Finding balance is part of tending the fire, and tending the fire is part of tending life. The child nods with a seriousness that makes you smile quietly. As the flames settle into a deep red glow, someone adjusts the wood, spacing the logs to burn evenly. Another adds a small twist of birch bark to refresh the flame. You see how everyone, from elders to children, understands the hearth. It is not a task for one person. It is a shared rhythm that moves through the entire settlement. You stand slowly, letting the warmth push against your back as you walk toward the entrance chamber. The contrast is immediate. The outer space feels colder, but the curtain keeps most of the chill at bay. When you look back at the main room, the fire glows like the heart of the longhouse. Soft golden light spills across sleeping nooks, storage spaces, and carved beams. It feels like stepping into a warm memory. You return to the hearth, drawn again by its glow. The fire crackles softly, sending thin spirals of smoke upward. You close your eyes for a moment and feel the warmth settle into your bones. The longhouse breathes now, and winter, waiting patiently outside, loses just a little of its power. You wake to the soft crackle of embers shifting in the hearth, the kind of sound that tells you the fire lasted through the night. When you stand and stretch, the air inside the longhouse feels noticeably warmer than the world beyond its walls. But warmth is a living thing in a home like this. If you do not tend to it with care, it slips away quietly. Today, the Vikings gather to teach you how they maintain that heat through ventilation, moisture control, and the delicate art of keeping fresh air moving without letting winter invade the room. The builders begin by inspecting the smoke vent above the hearth. Even without a flame roaring beneath it, the vent pulls cold air lightly upward. You step beneath it and lift your hand. You can feel the faint draft rising, a subtle current that carries smoke and moisture out of the home. One man explains that managing airflow is not optional. It is the secret behind a longhouse that stays warm without filling with smoke. Too little air, and the hearth suffocates. Too much air, and warmth rushes out with the wind. A widely discussed observation among researchers is that Viking smoke vents were adjustable in ways still not fully understood. Some believe they used sliding wooden covers. Others suggest woven mats or hides that could be shifted aside. The truth likely changed from home to home. Today, the Vikings use a layered hide that can be rolled back or lowered depending on the weather. You watch a woman climb a short ladder to adjust it, allowing just a narrow slit to remain open. The air shifts instantly, the room balancing itself like a creature finding its breath. You kneel near the hearth and feel the warmth radiating outward. Even the edges of the stone floor hold a gentle heat. But the builders caution you not to let the house become too sealed. Moisture from cooking, drying clothes, and breathing bodies builds quickly. If trapped, it will seep into the walls and bedding, leaving everything heavy and cold. One man lifts a wool blanket and shakes it lightly. A faint mist rises, He comments that dampness is winter's silent enemy. You walk to the wall where the chinking mud has hardened. When you press your fingers to it, it feels cool, firm, and solid. The builders tap the surface gently, listening for hollow echoes. A woman explains that if moisture creeps into the wall and freezes, it can crack the mud and reopen gaps. Regular inspections keep the walls strong. You help her patch a small line near the base, pressing mud firmly into place. Even this small task warms your fingers. Two children carry armfuls of damp clothing toward a drying rack set above the hearth. The rack is sturdy, made from wooden poles lashed together. When the children hang their garments, steam begins to rise from the cloth almost immediately. A mother joins them, spreading heavier cloaks near the edge. The heat dries the fabric gradually, preventing mold and helping keep the home fresh. Moisture management, you realize, is not just about comfort, it is survival. Near the entrance, a young man checks the area for drafts. He runs a small tuft of wool along the inner door frame. When the wool flutters slightly, he nods and adds more moss to the seam. You watch the care in his movements. Even a narrow draft near the doorway can pull warmth from the room, but he reminds you gently that the home must still breathe. So they leave a tiny, deliberate gap beneath the hide curtain. The air that moves through it is enough to keep the home fresh without chilling the space. A grandmother enters carrying a small clay pot filled with glowing coals. She sprinkles crushed herbs over the embers, releasing a warm, woody scent into the air. She explains that certain herbs help keep the air sweet when the house is sealed tightly for long periods. You inhale deeply, the fragrance wrapping around you like a soft scarf. The scent mixes with the warmth from the hearth, turning the longhouse into a place that feels lived in, not enclosed. A discussion begins about how often to lift the roof vent during the coldest weeks. One man insists on opening it several times a day to release smoke and steam. Another argues that too much opening wastes precious warmth. A woman suggests watching the rafters. If condensation gathers on the beams, it is time to adjust the vent. Their conversation reflects a timeless puzzle, the balance between fresh air and warm air. You watch them demonstrate. One of the builders lifts the hide cover slightly. A thin stream of warm air rises. You see it shimmer faintly. The children gasp quietly. When he lowers the hide again, the air settles, and you feel the room steady itself. The adjustment is small, but the effect is unmistakable. The longhouse is like a living creature responding to every change. Near the sleeping platforms, a young woman checks for dampness beneath the furs. She lifts a corner of a heavy pelt and feels the wood beneath. It is dry. She smiles with relief. She tells you that furs trap warmth beautifully, but they must stay dry. Wet fur is heavy, cold, and nearly impossible to heat in the dead of winter. You help her fluff the fur, shaking out dust and letting fresh air reach its base. At the far corner of the longhouse, a man rearranges firewood to keep it dry. He stacks logs loosely, allowing air to circulate between them. A young apprentice asks why they do not stack the wood tightly to save space. The man answers patiently that wood must breathe, or it will trap moisture, making it hiss and spit when burned. Dry wood burns clean and warm. Wet wood steals heat and fills the longhouse with smoke. The apprentice nods solemnly, absorbing the lesson like a story. Another group stirs the contents of a clay vessel used to store spare lamp oil. Fish oil can thicken in cold weather, becoming difficult to use. They set the jar near the hearth for a short while to soften it. The scent rises slightly, mixing with the warming air, a small inconvenience, but one that winter makes familiar. You follow a woman to the inner wall where a shallow clay bowl sits filled with evaporating water. She places it near the hearth for a moment, letting it warm, then moves it to a central beam. She explains that moisture from cooking and breathing can dry the air too much as well. In overly dry conditions, wooden beams crack and furs become brittle. This bowl helps keep the air balanced. A detail sometimes mentioned in interpretations of early northern homes suggests that some families used similar methods to keep indoor air comfortable. As you move through the longhouse, You begin noticing how subtle the adjustments are. A shift of the vent here, a small bowl of warm water there, a blanket shaken out, a seam repacked, a pot moved closer to the fire. Each motion contributes to a comfortable balance between warmth and airflow. You sit near the hearth and feel the longhouse around you, warm but not stifling, fresh but not drafty. The air tastes clean, touched with herbs, smoke, and the faint sweetness of drying wool. The home breathes because its people know how to guide it with patient, daily care. As evening light softens the room, someone adds a fresh log to the fire. Flames rise in a gentle dance. Children settle near sleeping nooks. Adults gather with quiet conversation. You listen to the soft crackles and gentle breaths that fill the space. The longhouse is alive now. Warmth stays because the home and the people shape it constantly, adjusting and tending with the same care they give their children, their animals, their stories. And as the fire glows deeper into twilight, you understand. A warm home is not just built, it is maintained, nurtured, and breathed into being every day of winter. You wake to a low, rumbling hush that feels different from the usual morning quiet. When you step outside for a moment, the world greets you with a wall of white. Snow drifts lazily from the sky, soft as feathers, each flake drifting without hurry. The wind is calm for now, but the air carries the unmistakable heaviness of an approaching storm. When you step back into the longhouse, the Vikings are already preparing. Today they focus on winter defense, reinforcing the home for the first true blizzard of the season. Inside, the fire glows bright, a warm pulse at the center of the space. People gather around with tools, woven mats, spare beams, and armfuls of straw. Their movements are purposeful, steady, without panic. They have known storms far worse than anything you have imagined. A man approaches the wall and presses his palm against it, listening for the faint rattle of cold wind. When he feels a subtle tremor, he calls others to help reinforce the outer layer. You join them outside, where the snow lands gently on your cloak. They lift heavy sod slabs, placing them carefully against the lower walls. The sod is frozen at the edges, but still dense, acting like a natural buffer. You grip the edge of a slab, surprised by its weight. When you press it into place, you feel the wall grow more solid beneath your hands. A widely accepted detail in northern archaeology is that many longhouses used seasonal reinforcements during the coldest months. Sod, snow, straw, and even stacked firewood acted as temporary shields against wind. You see this firsthand, as women and teenagers stack bundles of straw in strategic places. They wedge the bundles tightly against corners where gusts tend to sneak in. The straw rustles softly, giving off a faint scent of dried fields. One woman steps back to inspect the wall, squinting against the bright white snow. Satisfied, she turns to help another group stretching a thick, woven mat across the outer entrance. The mat hangs like a padded barrier, shielding the main door from the worst of the storm's bite. When you run your fingers along the mat, it feels rough, yet reassuring. It is crafted from layers of dried reeds and wool scraps, woven so tightly that wind can only whisper through it. Inside, several people prepare extra pegs and wedges for the roof. A man climbs a ladder to check the thatch above the beamline. He uses a long stick to tighten the bindings, making sure the roof will not shift under the weight of heavy snow. He moves with a familiarity that makes the task look easy, though you can see how carefully he positions every cord. Snowflakes land in his hair, melting instantly. A small debate rises nearby. Two builders disagree about how much snow is helpful. One claims snow piled on the roof acts as insulation, holding heat inside. The other warns that too much will weigh the structure down. Their discussion mirrors questions that researchers continue to explore when studying old longhouse ruins. Snow can act like a warm blanket, yes, but it can also collapse a roof if it grows too heavy. You listen as they compromise, maintain a moderate layer, but use long poles to knock off excess during the storm. A group of children help gather stones near the byre. They stack them along the outer wall, giggling as they arrange them in neat rows. You watch closely and realize the stones serve a purpose. When the wind strengthens, these stones will absorb cold air first, diffusing its force before it hits the timber. A clever trick, more rooted in experience than recorded knowledge. Back inside, the longhouse grows warmer and busier. A woman begins spreading fresh straw across the floor near the entrance. The straw absorbs melted snow and prevents icy patches. You kneel beside her to help, letting the straw fall through your fingers like dry gold. It crackles softly as it settles. Near the hearth, two elders test the airflow with a feather. They hold it near the vent and watch how it moves. The feather barely sways. They smile, relieved. The home is sealed tightly but still breathing. One elder taps the feather against his palm and remarks that storms reveal everything a builder did right or wrong. The younger people nod, absorbing the lesson. A man begins stacking firewood along the interior wall. He places the logs loosely, allowing air to circulate between them. The wood glows faintly from drying heat, carrying the aroma of resin and forest. An apprentice asks why they bring wood inside before a storm. The man answers patiently, "Cold wood burns poorly. Better to warm the logs now, so they catch quickly when needed." You reach for a log and feel the subtle warmth already seeping into its grain. Near the storage room, a mother inspects hanging herbs. She shakes bunches of thyme and angelica gently. Loose leaves drift to the floor. She tells you that storms tighten the air inside a home, making every scent stronger. Herbs help keep the atmosphere pleasant and clean. She hands you a sprig of dried thyme. Its fragrance soothes immediately. Another group prepares water containers. Though snow is abundant outside, melted snow requires more heat to warm than stored water. The Vikings fill clay jars and set them near the hearth, so they stay above freezing. You lift one of the jars. It feels heavy, but warm near the base. A simple precaution, but an important one. As the wind begins to rise beyond the walls, you help place woven mats along the inner door. These mats, thick and weighty, muffle sound and hold warmth. When you place your hand against one, you feel the difference immediately. The cold at the threshold fades. A young builder approaches carrying a bundle of long wooden poles. He explains that during the storm, they will use the poles to knock snow from the roof if the weight grows too heavy. He leans the poles against a wall near the entrance for easy access. You imagine stepping outside in the middle of the storm, snow swirling wildly, and using those poles to keep the roof safe. As the interior preparations continue, the atmosphere becomes calm yet focused. People move with intent but without fear. Winter storms are no surprise here. They are simply another season to prepare for, another test to endure. A grandmother calls several children to her side. She shows them how to check for drafts using a candle flame. The children hold the flame close to the walls, watching for flickers. When one child finds a tiny leak, the room erupts into gentle applause. The boy beams, and an older woman teaches him to pack the gap with moss. You help him press the moss firmly. The candle flame steadies. Outside, the wind's voice grows stronger. Snow swirls past the doorway in thicker waves. The longhouse responds quietly, its walls steady, its roof firm. Inside, someone adds another log to the hearth. Firelight blooms brighter, casting long shadows across the mats and beams. You sit near the hearth as preparations finish. People settle down, wrapping themselves in blankets and exchanging quiet words. The storm gathers outside, a distant roar, but in here, the world feels warm and steady. You feel the heat on your skin, smell the herbs in the air, hear the soft crackle of the fire. The longhouse stands ready, reinforced, insulated, defended. A warm island waiting for the storm to arrive. You awaken to a deep, muffled silence. The kind of silence that settles only after a heavy storm has blanketed the world in snow. When you sit up and stretch, the longhouse feels strangely peaceful. The fire still glows in the hearth, its light soft and sleepy. You step toward the entrance and press your hand against the hide curtain. It is cold to the touch, firm with a thin layer of frost. When you push it aside, a breath of icy air escapes the entry chamber, reminding you of the storm that passed in the night. But the longhouse held. It stayed warm. It stayed steady. Today, the Vikings gather not to reinforce the home, but to live inside its warmth, to use the comfort they worked so hard to build. You step into the main hall and notice how everyone moves more slowly than usual, savoring the cozy morning. A young girl sits near the hearth, legs tucked under a thick fur, holding her wooden bowl close. Steam rises from it, carrying the scent of barley porridge. She glances at you with a shy smile before taking another spoonful. Beside her, an elder wraps a woolen cloak around his shoulders and stretches his hands toward the fire. The warmth softens the lines of his face. You settle beside them and feel the heat reaching your boots, seeping upward in gentle waves. The warm stones beneath the hearth still radiate heat from last night's fire, a silent reminder of all the careful work done earlier in the season. You run your palm along the floor, feeling the faint pulse of warmth rising through the packed earth. A woman walks past carrying a large pot. Its aroma fills the air with the savory scent of root vegetables, dried herbs, and bits of salted fish softened in water. She places the pot on a low stand beside the fire, where the simmering stew crackles softly. You breathe in deeply. The smell wraps around you like a comfort you have known for years. The Vikings gather for breakfast, forming a loose circle around the hearth. Children drift in sleepy-faced, rubbing their eyes. Adults exchange quiet greetings, their voices low and deep. You watch them dip ladles into the stew and pour warm portions into wooden bowls. When one of the men hands you a bowl, the heat spreads through your fingers instantly. You blow gently on the surface, the steam swirling upward. A familiar observation among those who study northern settlements is that winter life revolved heavily around the hearth, not just for warmth, but for cooking, craft, laughter, and stories. You witness this now as the longhouse begins to hum with gentle activity. A group of women sit on low stools weaving fabric. Their hands move with a steady rhythm, the wool threads slipping between their fingers like flowing water. You step closer and listen to them discuss the best dye for spring tunics, even though spring feels impossibly far away. One woman holds up a spindle wrapped with pale grey thread. The texture looks soft, sturdy, and warm. Children gather near a small log bench and begin carving toys under the watchful eyes of an older man. The shavings fall gently, releasing the scent of fresh pine. One boy shows you a tiny wooden horse he carved. Its legs are uneven, but it carries the unmistakable charm of something made with earnest hands. You compliment it, and his face brightens. You wander toward the sleeping platforms where a mother shakes out blankets, letting warm air reach the wood underneath. She smiles and explains that bedding must be aired, often in winter, to prevent moisture from settling. You help her lift one heavy fur. It is thick and dense, still holding the warmth of the night. When you press it to your cheek, it feels like a soft embrace. A father and daughter sit near the wall mending leather boots. He threads a needle through a tough strip of hide and shows her how to tighten the stitch until it lies flat and strong. The girl concentrates intensely, her brow furrowing. You lean closer and watch her succeed with the next stitch. Her father's proud grin warms the room as much as the fire. Across the hall, two neighbors from nearby homes arrive with baskets of dried berries and small loaves of bread. They shake off snow from their cloaks and step into the warm air with sighs of relief. They exchange greetings with the family and settle near the hearth. The bread smells faintly of rye, still warm from being kept near another household's fire. You watch them break the loaves into pieces and share them around. A curious detail preserved in some old winter stories is that families often exchanged food with neighbors after storms, partly to check on one another's well-being and partly to enjoy variety during long months. You sense that same tradition unfolding here. The shared food brings smiles, conversation, and quiet gratitude. A few men prepare to clear snow from the roof. They gather the long wooden poles and wrap cloaks tightly around their shoulders. You follow them to the entrance chamber and help ready the door. When they push it open, a wave of cold air floods in. Snow nearly reaches the bottom of the outer frame. You watch them step outside onto the narrow path already carved into the storm's aftermath. Their voices fade into the swirling brightness beyond. You stay inside, drawn back to the warmth of the hearth. One elder woman begins telling a quiet story to the children. Her voice flows like a soft stream, describing a winter long ago when wolves gathered near the settlement, but the longhouse stayed warm enough to guard every family. The children listen with wide eyes, nibbling at dried berries. You lean against a beam and absorb the story's rhythm. These tales, you realize, teach more than mythology. They teach courage, unity, caution, and belonging. The men return, stomping snow from their boots. Their hair is dusted with frost, their cheeks flushed red. They warm their hands near the fire and laugh at the sight of steam rising from their sleeves. One of them pats the wall and comments proudly that the home withstood the storm with barely a whisper of draught. You share in his satisfaction. Later, families gather to repair tools, mend cloth, sharpen knives, and carve new pegs. Winter days offer time for these quieter tasks. You sit beside a woman who is shaping a small wooden ladle. She teaches you how to scrape the bowl smooth, using the edge of a sharp knife. You try, slowly at first, then with more confidence. The wood curls away in delicate ribbons. The longhouse hums with activity. Wool creaks softly on looms, knives tick against wood. Murmured conversation blends with children's laughter. The fire pops gently. It all creates a warm symphony of life held safely within the walls. As the day deepens, someone adds more logs to the hearth. Sparks rise, glowing briefly before fading. The roof vent guides the smoke upward in a steady stream. The warmth expands again, filling every corner of the longhouse. You take a seat at the edge of the fire and look around. People work, people rest, people talk quietly, children play. The longhouse, still fortified from last night's storm, feels like a warm world of its own, tucked inside a landscape buried in white. You close your eyes for a moment and let the heat sink into your bones. This is winter living the Viking way. Not just survival, not just shelter, but warmth woven from community, routine, craft, and story. Outside, snow piles high. Inside, the longhouse glows. You wake to the soft creak of the roof settling under its blanket of snow, a deep and gentle sound that feels almost like a sigh. The air inside the longhouse is warm, touched by the glow of dying embers, and the scent of wool, smoke, and herbs lingers like a familiar embrace. As you stretch and step from your sleeping platform, you notice movement near the entrance chamber. A pair of builders are fastening thick wool panels along the inner wall. Today they are adding the final touches, decorative elements that double as insulation, beauty stitched together with practicality. You join them as they unroll the first panel, a heavy woolen tapestry dyed in muted reds, browns, and soft greens. The colors glow warmly in the firelight. You brush your fingers across the fabric and feel its dense weave. The tapestry bears swirling shapes resembling waves and stylized animals, their forms flowing gracefully. A woman tells you the patterns are inspired by stories passed down through families. She presses the tapestry against the wall to measure its height, and you help her hold the upper edge steady. The wool feels thick enough to soften even the sharpest wind. As they secure the tapestry, the longhouse gains a new layer of warmth. Not just literal warmth, but a kind of emotional heat, the kind that fills a place with identity. A detail often noted by scholars exploring early Scandinavian textile fragments is that many decorative hangings were not purely ornamental. They acted as thermal barriers, catching warmth and preventing drafts from crawling along the wooden planks. You see that purpose clearly now, as the tapestry settles against the wall like a blanket. A young girl approaches, carrying a carved wooden panel. The panel is small but beautifully shaped, etched with interlocking knots that shimmer in the firelight. She hands it to her father, who smiles proudly. He explains that these carvings will be mounted along the beams near the ceiling. You look up, and notice the subtle variations of wood grain already above you. Adding these carved strips will not just adorn the beams, but prevent tiny gaps from letting cold trickle down. You lift the panel, surprised by its weight, and help guide it into place while he pegs it securely. Nearby, another group works on the door curtain. They replace the plain hide with one decorated at the edges using dyed thread. Swirling lines of red and yellow brighten the thick fur, and when they hang it across the inner entrance, it falls in soft folds that shimmer when the fire flickers. You push your hand against the decorated edge. It is warm, dense, and pleasingly heavy. The beauty does not weaken its function, it strengthens it. Children bring more treasures from a chest: bone pendants, polished stones, small carved figurines of animals and ships. They giggle as they place them on shelves near sleeping platforms. A grandmother instructs them to leave certain pieces near draft-prone corners. You raise an eyebrow, and she laughs. She explains that some families place objects believed to guard warmth, though she admits with a wink that it might simply give people something pleasant to look at on long winter days. You wander toward the far wall where a group of women hang a series of narrow woven strips. Each strip bears a different pattern: spirals, arrows, branching shapes like trees, even a few small symbols that might repeat stories whispered in the dark. When hung vertically, the strips overlap slightly, catching rising heat and slowing its escape. You help align the bottom edge of one strip. It drops with a satisfying softness, adding to the layered warmth building across the longhouse. A lively conversation begins near the central beam where a set of wooden shields hangs. The shields are round, painted in earthy tones, and decorated with simple geometric designs. One man argues that hanging shields helps catch heat and reduce drafts along the upper walls. Another suggests their placement honors ancestors. Whether symbolic or practical, the effect is clear. The shields absorb warmth and reflect it back into the room. You touch one shield lightly. It is smooth, cool at first, then gradually grows warmer beneath your hand. At the hearth, a young woman etches simple designs into small clay tiles. These will line the area near the fire to protect the floor and add a subtle brightness. She shows you one tile with a swirling motif. You turn it over in your hands and feel the textured grooves. When she arranges them around the hearth, the patterns cast gentle shadows, adding a faint beauty to the heart of the home. A man brings a bundle of dried lavender and hangs it from a beam near the sleeping areas. The scent drifts through the air, clean and calming. He tells you that the fragrance helps ease long nights. Another woman ties a cluster of dried orange peels near the entrance. Though imported and rare, the peels release a sweet, comforting scent that mingles with the warmth of the room. These touches remind you that beauty matters in the cold months. It lifts spirits when the world outside seems frozen and still. You help hang another tapestry near the bier. This one is softer, woven with natural wool colors that resemble clouds and hills. It is slightly thinner than the other hangings, but adds color and familiarity to the space. The animals on the other side of the wall shift softly, their warmth rising through the room. The tapestry absorbs and holds this subtle heat, creating another pocket of comfort. As you move through the longhouse, each new piece seems to deepen its character. The walls no longer look bare. The beams shimmer with carved details. The hearth glows brighter with its decorative tiles. The entrances carry color and softness. The sleeping nooks feel cradled by layers of woven beauty. Even the shadows feel warmer. Someone begins humming softly while working. The tune echoes gently through the hall. Others join in quietly, not in a formal song but in a shared rhythm. The warmth of the longhouse grows in this simple harmony. You realize that decorative touches do more than please the eyes. They enrich the spirit. In a world where winter lasts long and the nights feel endless, such small comforts are powerful. You take a seat near the hearth, letting your gaze wander across the room. Animal carvings guard the beams. Woven strips flutter gently when someone passes. Tapestries soften the walls. Herbal bundles sway lightly in the warm air. Everything feels softer now, more lived in, more human. The longhouse is no longer just a fortress against winter, it is becoming beautiful. And as you watch the final decorative piece settle into place, you feel a quiet truth warm your chest. A warm home shelters the body, but a beautiful one shelters the soul. You wake before dawn, the longhouse dim and quiet, its warmth wrapped around you like a thick blanket. The air carries the soft remnants of last night's fire, a gentle glow pulsing from the hearth's embers. You rise slowly, your breath visible in the cool pocket of air above your sleeping platform. Today is not a work day. Today is the quiet culmination of everything the Vikings have built through long months of effort. The longhouse stands complete, warm from floor to roof, ready to guard its people through the deepest winter nights. You move toward the center of the room, letting the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath your boots remind you of earlier days when the house was nothing more than a frame and a promise. Now, the space hums with gentle life. Tapestries hang along the walls like stories woven into fabric. Lamps rest in their holders, pools of amber waiting to awaken. Sleeping nooks glow softly behind their curtains, furs and wool blankets stacked neatly. Every corner feels lived in, cared for, warmed by human presence. The Vikings begin rising one by one. A mother stretches beneath her fur blankets and gathers her children for the morning meal. An elder sits with quiet dignity near the hearth, rubbing his hands together to welcome the new day. Two young apprentices hurry to stir the embers, coaxing them back to flame. Their hands move with practiced confidence. Birch bark curls, kindling snaps, warmth rises with a gentle whoosh. As firelight brightens the hall, the longhouse reveals itself fully. You walk slowly past each beam, each woven strip, each carved detail. You remember when the walls were bare and cold. Now they hold the heat of the fire, locking it inside like a secret. You place your hand against the wood. It feels warm, almost alive. A man begins preparing breakfast, stirring oats and dried berries into a pot that simmers over the growing flames. The scent spreads through the longhouse. Children gather near him, rubbing their eyes, murmuring sleepy greetings. A few neighbors from nearby homes slip inside, stamping snow from their boots. They bring baskets of bread and smoked fish, sharing what their own hearths prepared during the night. The air fills with soft conversation. You sit near the entrance for a moment to observe the layered doors now at work. Cold air rests in the small chamber between the two doorways, but it does not reach you. The inner curtain sways gently, blocking drafts while letting warmth stay where it belongs. You pull the curtain aside and step into the entry chamber. The difference is immediate. The air is cold, sharp, edged with winter. You push open the outer door and step outside. The world is covered in thick, sparkling snow. It rises nearly to the doorframe, soft and glistening under the pale morning light. The storm has passed, leaving behind a silent landscape. You look back at the longhouse. Its thick roof holds a smooth layer of snow, insulating the warmth beneath like a cozy cap. The walls appear sturdy, the sod at the base frozen into a protective shell. Smoke curls from the roof vent, rising in a thin line that sways gently in the windless air. You brush snow from a post and walk around the longhouse, admiring the careful reinforcements set before the storm. Straw bundles remain tightly wedged against vulnerable corners. The mud chinking looks undisturbed. No gaps, no cracks, no sign of wind successfully sneaking through. You feel a quiet pride settle over you, as though you had helped build this home from the very first branch. When you step back inside, warmth surrounds you instantly. Someone has placed hot stones near the entrance, radiating heat to ease the transition. You sit near the hearth and watch the Vikings prepare for the day. Even though winter has tightened its grip, life thrives within these walls. A grandmother begins telling a story, her voice low and rhythmic. She speaks of an ancient winter, colder than any remembered, when even the stars seemed to freeze. According to her tale, the people survived because they built their homes wisely, using the land, the wind, and each other to shape warmth. You listen, recognizing echoes of everything you have witnessed: clever insulation, shared labor, constant adjustments, and care woven into every beam and blanket. A young boy asks her why the longhouse stays warm even when the world outside feels like ice. She smiles and spreads her hands wide. She mentions the thick sod walls, the double layers of timber, the heated stones beneath the floor, and the warmth of the animals sleeping beyond the partition. But then she leans close, lowering her voice. She tells him the most important ingredient in a warm home is the people inside it: their breath, their movement, their laughter, their togetherness. You feel the truth of her words settle around you like another layer of warmth. As the day unfolds, the longhouse becomes a hub of quiet activity. Someone fetches fresh snow to melt for water, another mends a leather strap. Children chase each other around sleeping platforms, their laughter bright as sunlight. A group of women begin dyeing wool using dried plants saved from summer. Their work adds faint, comforting scents to the air. A few men sharpen tools, smoothing edges with steady hands. You realize you are witnessing not just survival, but a rhythm of living that thrives even in the harshest season. The longhouse is more than shelter. It is a living world, shaped by care, attention, and shared spirit. When evening settles, the lamps are lit one by one. Warm pools of golden light bloom around the room. The fire glows deep red, flames weaving shadows across the rafters. The longhouse breathes calmly, full of life. The Vikings gather around the hearth for their final meal of the day. Stew bubbles softly in the pot. Bread is passed from hand to hand. Children curl beneath furs, their cheeks rosy with warmth. Conversation drifts through the room in soothing tones. You look around and feel something gentle, something steady, a sense of belonging. You understand why the longhouse endures across centuries. It is not just a structure. It is a story of warmth shaped by human hands. And tonight, as snow settles softly outside, the longhouse glows from within, a refuge carved into winter's heart. Now, the longhouse grows quiet. The fire softens, its glow deepening into a slow, steady ember. The air is warm, calm, almost heavy with comfort. You let your breath settle as the shadows lengthen across the wooden floor. Outside, the winter world lies still beneath its blanket of white. Every sound is softened, every movement slowed, as though the landscape exhales in perfect, snowy silence. You shift slightly and feel the heat radiating through the furs beside you. It wraps around your shoulders like a gentle embrace. The longhouse no longer feels like a place built from timber and earth. It feels like a resting heartbeat, steady and protective, holding you in its quiet rhythm. The soft glow from the lamps flickers in the corners of the room, casting shapes that sway like drifting dreams. You let your eyes drift across the carved beams overhead. Their patterns blend into shadows, fading softly as your thoughts begin to blur into the slow rhythm of the evening. The warmth around you is steady, patient. It does not rush. It does not fade. It simply holds you, the way winter homes have held countless people through long, dark nights. Outside the walls, the snow keeps falling. Slow, unhurried flakes drift down, piling gently against the longhouse, adding to the thick cocoon of quiet that shelters everyone inside. You imagine the snow softening every sound, turning the whole world into something distant and gentle. You take one more slow breath. The air feels warm in your chest, peaceful in a way that encourages your thoughts to loosen and your body to grow heavier. You let the comfort of the space settle over you like a blanket. Your eyelids soften, your breath deepens. The longhouse grows quieter still, and you drift into rest,